Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Michael Ravencrest. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, and I've seen plenty of things that would make most folks think twice about camping alone in the woods. But I never believed in ghosts, not until Whispering Gap. I'm 41 years old, been working these Kentucky mountains since I was 25. Used to study for the ministry before I came out here. Lost my faith somewhere along the way. And then 2 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah to cancer. After that, these quiet woods became the only place that made sense to me. The Daniel Boone National Forest covers a lot of ground, but my area is the high country around Whispering Gap. It's a trail system that sits about 20,800 feet up, where the air should be cool and clean. Problem is, September of 1968 was the hottest, driest summer anyone could remember. Even up in my mountains, the heat stuck to you like wet wool. I remember that morning clear as anything. The humidity was so thick you could practically drink it. Not a breath of wind stirring the leaves, and they hung there like they were painted on the trees. The whole forest felt like it was holding its breath. Eddie Walsh, my partner, was driving up from town with some hikers' reports. 3 different families had called about seeing a woman walking the trails at night. She was wearing old-fashioned clothes, they said, like something from a history book, and she was calling out names, children's names. Probably just some poor soul with problems. I told Eddie over the radio. Heat like this can make people do strange things. But even as I said it, something felt wrong about the whole thing. I'd been walking these trails for 16 years. I knew every rock, every tree, every sound the wind made through the gaps. And lately, the sounds were different. Whispers seemed to echo longer than they should. Normal talking got swallowed up like thus. A forest was eating the words. The old-timers in town had stories about Whispering Gap, of course. Every mountain hollow has its tales. This one was about a pioneer woman named Martha Caldwell. Back in 1847, a whole wagon train got stuck in the gap during a cholera outbreak. Over 200 people died, including Martha's husband and 3 little children. They say she went mad with grief, wandering the mountains calling for them until she died too. Just stories, I always said. Grief and guilt playing tricks on people's minds. I should have listened to those stories. The trail up to Whispering Gap starts easy enough, winding through thick pine and oak. But as you climb higher, the trees thin out and the rocks get strange. There are formations up there that look almost like buildings if you catch them in the right light. The Cherokee used to say spirits lived in the stone itself. That morning I was checking the trail markers when I found the first toy. It was a little wooden horse, hand-carved, sitting right in the middle of the path like someone had just set it down. The wood was old, really old, but it looked like it had been played with recently. There were tiny finger marks in the dust on its sides. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The carving was the kind of work you'd see from the 1800s, all done with simple tools. But how did it get here? And why did it look so fresh? I slipped it into my pack and kept walking. A mile further up, I found another one. A small cloth doll, faded and patched, sitting on a rock beside the trail. Then a spinning top. Then a tiny tea set, all arranged on a flat boulder like children had just finished playing with it. By the time I reached the main clearing at Whispering Gap, I had a pack full of old toys, all looking like they'd been played with yesterday. The clearing itself felt wrong that day. It was a natural bowl in the mountains, surrounded by tall pines and rocky outcrops. Usually it was peaceful, even beautiful. But that morning, the silence was too heavy. The air was too still, and the temperature was wrong. It felt cold despite the blazing sun overhead. I set up my equipment to test the air quality and check the trail conditions. That's when I heard it for the first time. "Come to Mama." The voice was soft, distant, like it was coming from across the clearing. I looked up, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. just empty forest and dancing shadows. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there? Do you need help?" Nothing. I went back to my work, but the feeling of being watched never left me, and every few minutes, I'd hear it again. That same voice, calling out in a sing-song way, "Come to Mama! Come play with Mama!" The voice seemed to move. Sometimes it came from the north side of the clearing, sometimes from the rocks to the south. But I never saw anyone. And the strange thing was, my voice seemed to disappear the moment I spoke, like the forest was swallowing it up before it could carry. I finished my work as fast as I could and headed back down the trail. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, not walking behind me that I would have heard, but something moving through the trees alongside the path, keeping pace with me. When I got back to the ranger station, Eddie was waiting with more reports. 2 more families had called. A woman in pioneer dress, calling for children who weren't there, always around sunset, always near Whispering Gap. "We need to check this out properly," Eddie said. He was younger than me, only been on the job 3 years, but he was thorough. If someone's having a breakdown up there, they could hurt themselves. Or someone else. I showed him the toys I'd collected. His face went pale when he saw how old they looked. "Where exactly did you find these?" he asked. "Scattered along the trail, all arranged like kids had just been playing with them." Eddie picked up the wooden horse and examined it close. "Eli." "Mike, this looks like museum-quality work. How did it get up there?" I didn't have an answer, but as I looked at those toys spread out on my desk, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Because in all my years on these trails, I'd never seen so much as a candy wrapper that the hiking families had missed. So how had I missed a dozen antique toys? The next morning, Eddie brought files from the County Historical Society. We spread them out in the ranger station, and what we found made my coffee go cold in my cup. "Look at this," Eddie said, pointing to an old newspaper clipping from 1847. "Pioneer party stricken by disease in Mountain Pass. Over 200 dead." The article was faded and hard to read, but the details were clear enough. A wagon train heading west had taken shelter in what was now called Whispering Gap. Cholera had swept through the camp. They'd buried the dead in mass graves, unmarked because everyone who might have remembered the names was dead too. "Here's the part that'll interest you," Eddie said, sliding another paper across the desk. It was a handwritten account from one of the few survivors. Martha Caldwell lost her mind with grief after her children died. She would walk through the camp at night, calling their names, trying to give food to graves. On the night she died, she was found arranging toys around the burial sites, talking to empty air like her babies were still playing. I stared at the paper. The handwriting was old-fashioned, all loops and careful letters. But it was the details that made my hands shake. A woman walking at night, calling children's names. Toys arranged like children had been playing. "It's just a coincidence," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Eddie pulled out another folder. "I also got these from the sheriff's office, missing person reports from the last 5 years, all from Whispering Gap. There were 6 reports total. A teenager who'd gone camping alone and never came back. A young couple who'd been seen heading up the trail and vanished. 2 children who'd wandered off from their family campsite. All of them last seen near Whispering Gap. None of them ever found. The official reports say they probably fell into sinkholes or got lost in the caves," Eddie said. "But Mike, I've hiked every inch of that area. There aren't any sinkholes big enough to hide a body, and the caves are all shallow." I looked at the photos clipped to each report. Young faces, smiling, alive. What had happened to them up there? "We're going up tonight," I decided. "If there's someone having problems up there, we need to help them. And if there's something else..." I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Eddie nodded. "I'll bring camping gear. And my camera." That evening, we hiked up to Whispering Gap as the sun was setting. The forest was still as death. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals. Even the insects seemed to have gone quiet. Our footsteps sounded unnaturally loud on the dry leaves. We reached the clearing just as full darkness fell. Eddie set up our camp while I checked the area with my flashlight. The toys I'd found earlier were gone, but new ones had taken their place. A rocking horse made of wood and rope, a set of tin soldiers, a child's bonnet, faded but clean. "Eddie, look at this," I called. He came over with his camera and started taking pictures. The flash seemed too bright in the heavy darkness, and each pop of light made the shadows jump in ways that hurt to look at. That's when we heard the singing. It was a lullaby, soft and sweet, coming from somewhere in the trees around us. A woman's voice, gentle and loving, the kind of voice that would comfort a scared child. But we couldn't see anyone. "Jesus," Eddie whispered, lowering his camera. "Where is that coming from?" The singing stopped. For a long moment there was nothing but silence and the sound of our own breathing. Then the voice spoke, clear as day. "Who's there?" "Who's I? In Mama's house?" I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the tree line. Nothing. Empty forest. But the voice had been close, maybe 50 feet away. "Ma'am?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Michael Ravencrest. Do you need assistance?" Silence. Then from a completely different direction. "Such nice men. Are you here to play with Mama's children?" Eddie and I looked at each other. His face was pale in the flashlight beam. "Ma'am, where are your children?" I tried to keep my voice calm, professional. "Are they safe?" The laughter that came back made my blood freeze. It started soft and motherly, but it went on too long, rising in pitch until it sounded more like screaming than laughing. Then it cut off, and the forest went silent again. We waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. Eddie had his camera ready, I had my flashlight. But nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Finally, around midnight, exhaustion won out over fear. We took turns keeping watch, but nothing happened for the rest of the night. When morning came, we packed up quickly and headed back down. But when Eddie developed his film back at town, we got a shock that changed everything. There, in every single photo he'd taken in the clearing, were extra figures. Translucent, hard to make out, but definitely human shapes. A woman in a long dress, standing among the trees, and smaller figures around her. Children, maybe 4 or 5 of them, playing with toys we couldn't see. "That's impossible," Eddie said, staring at the photographs. "There was nobody there." I looked at the images again. The woman's face was hard to make out, but there was something wrong with her eyes. They looked empty, like dark holes in her face. "We're going back tonight," I said, "and this time we're bringing backup." But Eddie shook his head. "Mike, I think we should call this in to the state police. This is beyond Park Ranger business." Before I could answer, my radio crackled to life. It was dispatch with an urgent message. A family of 4 had gone camping in Whispering Gap 2 days ago. They'd missed their scheduled check-in, and no one had heard from them since. Their names were the Hendersons, Tom and Linda, and their 2 children, ages 6 and 8. We grabbed our gear and raced up the mountain. This time we weren't looking for ghosts. We were looking for people who might still be alive. We found their campsite in a small clearing about half a mile from the main gap. Their tent was still standing. Their car was parked at the trailhead, but there was no sign of the family. The camp looked strange, though. The cooking gear was arranged in a perfect circle with 4 plates set out like someone was expecting dinner guests. The children's toys were lined up in neat rows, as if they'd been organized by someone very careful and precise. "Tom! Linda!" I shouted. "Henderson family, can you hear me?" My voice seemed to get swallowed up by the trees, just like before. But this time, we got an answer. "We're playing with Mama," came a child's voice from deeper in the forest. "She's teaching us new games." Eddie and I looked at each other. The voice had sounded happy, not frightened. But something about it was wrong. It was too flat, too emotionless. "Kids, this is Park Ranger Ravencrest," I called. "Where are your parents?" "Mama says they're sleeping," came the answer. "Mama says they'll wake up when it's time to play forever." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Eddie grabbed my arm. "We need to find them, now." We followed the voice deeper into the woods, calling out as we went. But the answers always came from farther away, like the children were leading us somewhere specific. Finally, we reached a small ravine that I'd never noticed before in all my years on these trails. It was hidden behind a screen of thick pine trees, and the bottom was filled with what looked like old stones arranged in patterns. That's when I realized what we were looking at. Grave markers. Dozens of them, stretching back into the shadows. Most were just rough stones, but some had names carved into them. Names from the 1800s. And at the far end, 4 fresh mounds of earth with wooden crosses stuck in the ground. "Dear God," Eddie whispered. "Mike, those are new graves." That's when we heard the woman's voice again, but this time it was right behind us. "Welcome to Mama's family." We spun around, and there she was. Martha Caldwell stood 10 feet away from us, and she looked exactly like the pioneer woman from Eddie's photographs. She wore a long, faded dress with an apron, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun. But her face was wrong. Her skin was too pale, too thin, like old paper, and her eyes were empty black holes that seemed to pull light into them. "Don't be afraid," she said, and her voice was kind, motherly. "Mama's here now. Everything will be all right." Eddie was fumbling with his camera, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't work the controls. I kept my flashlight trained on her, but the beam seemed to dim when it hit her, like she was absorbing the light. "Ma'am," I managed to say, "where are the Henderson children?" She smiled, and it was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen. Her lips pulled back to show teeth that were too sharp, too long. "They're with Mama now, safe and warm and loved forever." "Are they alive?" Eddie croaked. "They're better than alive," Martha said. "They're mine." She raised one pale hand and pointed toward the graves. "Their bodies are sleeping, but their spirits are awake, playing and laughing with Mama's other children. Would you like to meet them?" The air around us started getting colder. I could see my breath steaming in the flashlight beam, even though moments before it had been stifling hot. And in the midst of our breathing, shapes started to form. Children. Translucent. Flickering, but definitely children. They appeared one by one around Martha, maybe a dozen of them, all wearing clothes from different time periods. Some in pioneer dress like Martha, others in more modern camping clothes. 2 of them looked like the Henderson kids. "Say hello to the nice men," Martha told them, and they all turned to look at us. Their faces were pale and empty, just like hers, but they smiled and waved like normal children would. "Hello?" they said in unison, their voices flat and emotionless. "Do you want to play with us?" That's when Eddie's camera flash finally went off. The light seemed to hurt Martha. She hissed and stepped backward, raising her hands to shield her eyes. The children flickered and faded for a moment. "Run," I whispered to Eddie. "Run now." We turned and crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, Martha's voice rose in anger. "Don't leave Mama! Mama needs you! Mama loves you!" The children's voices joined hers. "Come play with us. Come be our daddies. Don't leave us alone." We ran down the mountain as fast as we could, stumbling over rocks and roots in the darkness. Every few minutes, I'd look back and see lights moving through the trees behind us. Pale, cold lights that flickered like candles in the wind. But we made it to the ranger station alive. Eddie was in shock, just sitting in a chair and staring at nothing. I got on the radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. The phone lines were dead too. "She cut us off," I said. "She doesn't want us calling for help." Eddie developed the new photographs with shaking hands. These came out clearer than the ones from the night before. Martha was in every shot, and so were the children. But in the last photo, the one taken when the flash had hurt her, you could see something that made my stomach turn. Behind Martha, barely visible in the shadows, were adult figures. Men and women in various states of decay, standing like guards around the gravesites. Some looked fresh, recently dead. Others were just bones in rotted clothing. "Those are the missing hikers," Eddie whispered. "All of them. She's been collecting them for years." I studied the photo closer. In the background, barely visible, I could make out two adult figures that looked like they might be the Henderson parents. They were standing perfectly still, their eyes empty like the children's. "We have to go back," I said. "If the Henderson kids just died, maybe there's still time to save them." Eddie shook his head. "Mike, that thing isn't human. We can't fight her." But I was already loading my pack. I'd lost my wife to something I couldn't control. I wasn't going to lose those children, too. "Then we don't fight her," I said. "We find another way." I remembered something from my seminary days, back when I still believed in God and salvation. I dug through my old books and found what I was looking for, a small wooden cross that had belonged to my grandfather. He'd been a missionary in these mountains back in the 1920s, and the cross was made from wood taken from an old church that had burned down. "Faith," I told Eddie. "If she's what I think she is, faith might be the only thing that can stop her." Eddie looked at the cross like I'd lost my mind. "You think that little piece of wood is going to stop a ghost that's been killing people for over a century?" "Maybe," I said. "And maybe if we don't try, more families are going to die." We hiked back up in the pre-dawn darkness, this time armed with everything we could think of. Flashlights with extra batteries, the camera, a first aid kit, and my grandfather's cross. I also brought a small Bible, though I wasn't sure I remembered how to use it. When we reached the ravine, the scene had changed. The graves were arranged differently now, and there were two new mounds of earth next to the ones we'd seen before. Fresh dirt, recently dug. "The parents," Eddie whispered. Martha was waiting for us, but this time she wasn't alone. The spirit children were there, along with the adult figures from the photograph. They formed a circle around the graves, watching us with empty eyes. "You came back," Martha said, and she sounded pleased. "Mama knew you would. Good men always come back to help Mama's children." "Let the Henderson kids go," I said, holding the cross out in front of me. "They don't belong here." Martha laughed, that awful sound that went on too long. "They belong to Mama now, just like all the others, just like you will." The temperature plummeted. Our breath turned to fog, and frost started forming on the trees around us. But the cross in my hand stayed warm. "You're bound here," I said, remembering the old stories. "You can't leave this place, can you? All these years, all these people you've taken. You're still trapped in your grief." Her smile faltered. "Mama isn't trapped. Mama is home, with her children." "These aren't your children, Martha. Your children died in 1847. They're at peace now." Her face twisted with rage. "No, they're here. They're with Mama. They need Mama." She gestured to the spirit children, and they started moving toward us. But when they got close to the cross, they stopped like there was an invisible wall between us and them. "The Henderson kids," I pressed. "They're not dead yet, are they? That's why their spirits look different from the others." Eddie caught on. "She has to kill the body before she can keep the spirit. That's why she arranged the toys, tried to make them comfortable. She was playing with them before she killed them." Martha's eyes blazed with fury. "They were scared. Mama made them happy. Mama gave them love." "Where are they?" I demanded, holding the cross higher. "Where are their bodies?" For just a moment, Martha's form flickered and became almost transparent. The cross was weakening her. She pointed a shaking finger toward a small cave opening behind the graves. "Sleeping," she whispered. "Safe and warm with Mama." Eddie and I ran for the cave. Behind us, Martha screamed in rage. But she couldn't follow. The cross was protecting us. Inside the cave, we found them. Tom and Linda Henderson, both dead from what looked like exposure. But the children were still alive, barely. They were unconscious, their breathing shallow, their skin blue-white from cold, but alive. We carried them out of the cave as quickly as we could. Martha was waiting, and she was furious. "Give them back!" she shrieked. "They're Mama's babies now. Mama needs them." The spirit children pressed closer, reaching out with transparent hands. Some of them were crying, begging us not to take their new playmates away. "I'm sorry," I said to Martha, and I meant it. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family, but this has to stop. I held up the cross and started reciting the only prayer I could remember. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Martha and her spirit children began to fade with each word, but she fought back. The ground under our feet started shaking, and rocks began falling from the cave entrance. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The temperature dropped even further. Ice started forming on our clothes, and I could barely feel my fingers around the cross. He restoreth my soul. Martha made one last desperate attack. She rushed at us, her form becoming solid and terrible. Her hands were claws, her face was a skull, and her empty eye sockets blazed with unholy fire. But the cross held. She hit the invisible barrier and bounced back, screaming in pain and rage. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The spirit children began disappearing one by one, fading into whatever peace they'd been denied. Some of them looked relieved as they vanished. Others reached out desperately as if they didn't want to leave Martha alone. For thou art with me. Martha's form was becoming transparent again, but her voice, it was still strong, still filled with rage and grief. You can't take them all, she screamed. Mama will find new children. Mama will never be alone again. Martha's words hit me like a physical blow. She was right. Even if we saved the Henderson children, she would just find others. How many more families would disappear into Whispering Gap? Eddie, I said, get the kids out of here, now. What about you? I looked at the cross in my hands, then at Martha's fading form. She was weakened, but not gone. When the sun came up and my faith wavered, she'd be back to full strength. Someone has to end this. Eddie understood. He picked up both Henderson children and started carrying them toward the trail. Mike, don't do anything stupid. But I was already walking toward Martha. The spirit children had mostly faded away, but she was still there, still fighting the power of the cross. You want to know why you're really trapped here? I asked her. It's not the gap. It's not the graves. It's your guilt. Her empty eyes focused on me with hatred. Mama has no guilt. Mama loves her children. You let them die, I said. The words felt cruel, but they had to be said. When the cholera came, you couldn't save them. And you've been trying to make up for it ever since. Mama tried. Mama did everything. But it wasn't enough. And deep down, you know it. That's why you can't let go. That's why you keep taking other people's children. You think if you save enough of them, it will make up for the ones you lost. Martha's form was becoming more solid again, but not in a good way. She was changing, becoming something darker and more terrible. Her motherly appearance was falling away, revealing the madness and grief underneath. They died afraid, she whispered, and for the first time her voice sounded truly human. Mama couldn't comfort them. They called for Mama, and Mama couldn't help them. I know, I said, and I did. I thought about Sarah dying in that hospital bed, asking me to make the pain stop, and I couldn't. Just like Martha couldn't save her children, but taking other children won't bring yours back. It won't ease your guilt. It just spreads the pain to more families. Martha looked at the graves around us, all the people she'd killed trying to fill the hole in her heart. Mama just wanted them to be happy, she said, and she sounded lost, confused. Mama wanted to keep them safe. The only way to keep them safe is to let them go home to their real families. For a moment I thought I'd reached her. Her face softened, and she looked almost human again. But then her expression hardened, and I realized I'd made a mistake. No, she said. If Mama can't have children, then no one can. The temperature around us plummeted even further. The trees started creaking and groaning as ice formed on their branches. And Martha began to change again, but this time into something far worse than a grieving mother. She grew taller, her limbs stretching out like spider legs, her face elongated, becoming something between human and wolf. And her voice, when it came, was the sound of winter wind through empty houses. If Mama can't keep them, Mama will make sure no one else can either. That's when I understood. All these years, I'd thought she was trying to build a family. But she wasn't trying to save children at all. She was trying to destroy families, the way hers had been destroyed. The maternal act was just a lure, a way to get close to her victims. The cross in my hand was getting hot now, almost too hot to hold. But it was the only thing standing between me and whatever Martha had become. "You're not a mother anymore," I said. "You're just a killer." She lunged at me with claws that were longer than my fingers. I held up the cross and she bounced off the invisible barrier, but this time it flickered. My faith was wavering and she could sense it. "Yes," she hissed. "Doubt. Mama can smell your doubt. You don't really believe. Do you? Not after your wife died. Not after God let her suffer." She was right. Standing there in that freezing ravine, surrounded by the graves of her victims, I felt my faith crumbling. What kind of God would let this happen? What kind of God would let children die of cholera while their mother watched helplessly? The cross flickered again, its protection weakening. "That's right," Martha whispered. "There is no God. There is no protection. There is only pain and loss and death." She was almost through the barrier now. I could see her clearly, no longer even pretending to be human. Just hunger and madness wearing the shape of a woman. But then I thought about Eddie, carrying those children down the mountain. I thought about their parents, who would never see them again, but at least wouldn't have to wonder what happened to them. I thought about all the families who would camp safely in these mountains because Martha wouldn't be here to hurt them anymore. Maybe God wasn't in the cross. Maybe faith wasn't about believing in divine protection. Maybe faith was just choosing to do the right thing, even when you were scared, even when you doubted, even when you knew it might cost you everything. I stood up straighter and held the cross higher. "You're wrong," I said. "There is protection. Not from God, maybe, but from people who care enough to stand between monsters and children." The cross blazed with light. Not holy light, but human light. The light of every parent who'd ever stayed up all night with a sick child. The light of every teacher who'd protected their students. The light of every person who'd chosen love over fear. Martha screamed and threw herself against the barrier one final time, but instead of bouncing off, she passed right through it. Because I wasn't trying to keep her out anymore. I was letting her in. She slammed into me with the force of a freight train, her claws tearing into my chest. But I wrapped my arms around her and held tight, pressing the cross between us. "If you want to kill someone," I gasped, "kill me. Leave the family, us alone." Martha looked into my eyes, and for just a moment I saw the woman she used to be. Tired, grieving, lost. She'd been holding on to her pain for so long that she'd forgotten how to let go. "I'm sorry about your children," I whispered. "I'm sorry you couldn't save them, but you can save others by stopping this." She pulled back, her claws still embedded in my chest. "Mama is so tired," she said in a small human voice. "I know. You can rest now. Your children are waiting for you, wherever good mothers go when they die." Martha looked around at all the graves, all the people she'd killed. "What about them? What about the ones Mama hurt?" "They'll forgive you," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Parents forgive a lot when they love their children. Martha nodded slowly. Then she looked at the cross pressed between us. "Will you bury Mama with her babies?" she asked. "The real ones, not the ones Mama stole." "Yes," I promised. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. It transformed her face completely, making her look like the loving mother she'd once been. "Thank you," she said. And then she was gone. Just like that, faded away like morning mist. The cold lifted, the ice melted, and the sun began to rise over Whispering Gap. I was alone in the ravine with the graves of her victims and the growing realization that I was bleeding pretty badly from where her claws had torn into me. I made it back to the ranger station, barely. Eddie was there with paramedics he'd called from town, working frantically over the Henderson children. They were alive, but it would be touch and go. The doctors said I was lucky. Martha's claws had missed anything vital, though I'd carry the scars for the rest of my life. Small price to pay, considering. The official report listed the Henderson parents as victims of a hiking accident, hypothermia brought on by an unexpected cold snap. The children's survival was called miraculous. Eddie and I never mentioned Martha or the graves in the ravine. 3 days later, I went back up to Whispering Gap with a small crew. We'd told them we were doing a geological survey, checking for unstable ground. What we actually did was locate the original burial site from the 1847 cholera outbreak. It took most of the day, but we found them. Martha's real family was buried in a small clearing about half a mile from where she'd been killing people. Simple wooden markers, weathered almost smooth by time. Thomas Caldwell, age 34. Mary Caldwell, age 8. Samuel Caldwell, age 6. Baby Rose Caldwell, age 2. We found Martha's remains nearby, just bones and scraps of cloth, but definitely human. We buried her with her family and said a simple prayer over the grave. I didn't know if it would help, but it felt like the right thing to do. The gap was officially closed to public access 2 weeks later. The official reason was geological instability, potential sinkholes that could endanger hikers. Only Eddie and I knew the real reason. But the story doesn't end there. I transferred to a different part of the forest and eventually took a job as a chaplain for the Park Service. Funny how facing real evil can restore your faith in good. I'd learned that God might not always protect us from monsters, but He gives us the strength to protect each other. Eddie left the Park Service entirely. Last I heard, he was teaching high school in Louisville, showing kids his photographs of local wildlife. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and I used to be a music teacher before I became a fire tower observer. That's important because I have what people call perfect pitch. I can hear sounds most folks miss, pick out individual notes in a crowded symphony, tell you if your piano needs tuning from across the room. Sometimes I wish I couldn't. I've been watching over the Jefferson National Forest in West Virginia for 12 years now, specifically the Misery Mountain District. My tower sits at 4,200 feet, 12 miles from the nearest road. When winter comes, I'm cut off for days at a time. Most people think that sounds lonely, but after my divorce last spring, lonely felt like exactly what I needed. December 1979 was shaping up to be a harsh one. The Weather Service had been talking about a big storm system moving in from the west, temperatures dropping below 15 degrees, winds that could knock a person clean off their feet. I'd been through worse, though. My little tower had weathered plenty of storms. That morning started normal enough. Coffee at sunrise, checking the weather instruments, radioing in my daily report to the main station. Ray Coleman, my supervisor, had been worried about some of the older equipment acting up lately. The radio would crackle with static at odd times. The wind gauge would spin, even when the air was still. I figured it was just the cold affecting the electronics. I should have known better. Around 10 that morning, I heard it for the first time. A church bell, ringing slow and steady across the mountain. Nothing unusual about that, except there wasn't a church within 20 miles of my tower. The nearest one was down in Bramwell, and I'd never been able to hear it from up here, not even on the clearest days. The sound was perfect, though, pure and clear, each note hanging in the cold air before fading into silence. 12 tolls, then nothing. I checked my watch, 10:03 a.m. Odd time for church bells, but maybe they were testing something. I went back to my routine, updating the weather log, checking the fire danger reports. But something felt off. The birds had gone quiet. I'd been up here long enough to know the mountain's rhythms, and silence like this usually meant something was coming. A storm, maybe, or predators moving through. But the sky was clear blue, not a cloud in sight. Around noon, I heard the bells again. Same rhythm, same perfect tone. 12 slow tolls that seemed to echo from every direction at once. This time I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the valleys below, looking for any sign of a church, a bell tower, anything that could explain the sound. Nothing. The mountains stretched out below me, covered in snow and bare trees. I could see the old mining roads, the rusted equipment scattered around from the coal operations that shut down decades ago. My grandfather used to work those mines before the big explosion in 1902. 83 men died that day, including the church bell ringer who'd been trying to warn everyone about the gas leak. That's when I noticed something strange. Down in one of the valleys, there were fresh tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks, too regular, too purposeful. They looked almost like a line of people had walked through. But who would be way out here in the middle of winter? I radioed down to the main station. "Ray, you got any crews working the Misery Mountain area today?" Static crackled through the speaker for a long moment before Ray's voice came through. "Negative, Eleanor. Weather's got everyone grounded until this storm passes. Why?" "Just seeing some odd things up here. Probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it in my bones, the way you can feel a storm coming even when the sky is clear. Something was wrong on my mountain. The third time I heard the bells, it was just past 3 in the afternoon. The sun was already low, casting long shadows across the snow. But this time, something was different. As the sound faded away, I heard something else underneath it. Voices. Faint and distant, but definitely human voices calling out in what sounded like panic. I strained to listen, pressing my face against the cold glass of the tower windows. The voices seemed to be coming from the old mining area, but that was impossible. Nobody lived down there anymore. Nobody had for 77 years. Then the wind picked up, and the voices were gone. I tried to tell myself it was just the mountain playing tricks. Sound does strange things in these valleys, bouncing off rock walls and carrying for miles. But I'd never heard anything like this before, and I'd been listening to this mountain for 12 years. As darkness fell, I prepared for what looked like it was going to be a long night. The storm was definitely coming. I could see the clouds building on the horizon, dark and heavy with snow. The temperature was already dropping fast, and the wind was starting to howl around the tower. But underneath the wind, I could swear I heard something else. A low, rhythmic sound, like machinery running, like the sound an old mine elevator might make, creaking and groaning as it carried men deep into the earth. I checked all my equipment twice, made sure the radio was working, the generator was fueled up, the emergency supplies were ready. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness below. Just before I settled in for the night, I heard the bells one more time. But this time, they didn't stop at 12 tolls. They kept ringing, faster now, more urgent, like someone was pulling the rope frantically, trying to warn everyone about something terrible that was about to happen. The sound echoed across the mountain for almost 10 minutes before it finally stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete it made my ears ring. That's when I knew for certain that something was very, very wrong on Misery Mountain. The storm hit just after midnight, and with it came the impossible. I woke up to the tower shaking in the wind, snow pelting the windows like thrown rice. The thermometer outside read 8 degrees and falling. Normal winter storm stuff for these mountains, except for one thing. The radio was making sounds. Not static, not the usual weather interference. It was playing music, old hymnal music, the kind they used to sing in those little mountain churches. I'd heard my grandmother hum these tunes when I was little, songs about death and redemption and finding peace in the valley. But there was no signal that could carry music up to my tower. We were too remote, too high up. The only thing that radio should pick up was the weather service and emergency channels. I fiddled with the dials, trying to clear the signal, but the music just got louder. And underneath it, I could hear voices singing along. Men's voices, rough and tired, like they'd been working all day in the dark underground. That's when the bells started again. Even through the storm, even with the wind howling around the tower, I could hear them clearly. 12 slow tolls, just like before. But now they seemed to be answering the music on the radio, keeping time with the hymnal like some kind of supernatural chorus. I grabbed my flashlight and pressed my face to the window, trying to see down into the valley. The snow was coming down heavy, but for just a moment, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Lights. Little flickering lights moving in a line through the old mining area, like a group of people carrying lanterns. But who would be out in this weather, and why were they heading toward the sealed mine shafts? The bells stopped, and suddenly my radio went back to normal static. I tried calling Ray on the emergency channel. "Base station, this is Miser Cirrus, I Tower. You there, Ray?" Nothing but static for a long moment. Then Ray's sleepy voice crackled through. Eleanor? What's wrong? It's past midnight. Ray, I need you to check something for me. Are there any old church records for this area? Anything about a church bell that used to ring here? What? Eleanor, are you feeling okay up there? This storm's got you spooked? Please, Ray, it's important. A pause. Well, there's some old mining company records in the historical archives. Story goes there was a church bell ringer back in 1902 who tried to warn the miners about a gas leak. Bell rang for 3 days straight before the explosion. Why? I looked out at those moving lights again. They were closer now, and I could swear I saw the shapes of men in mining clothes, their faces blackened with coal dust. But that was impossible. The storm, the isolation, my mind was playing tricks. Eleanor? You still there? I'm here. Ray, I think something's wrong up here. Really wrong. What kind of wrong? Before I could answer, the bells started again. But this time, Ray heard them too. I could tell because he went quiet, and I could hear them faintly through his radio mic. What the hell was that? He whispered. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Those bells have been ringing all day, and there's no church up here. No bell tower. Nothing. The lights in the valley had stopped moving. They seemed to be gathered around one of the old mine entrances, the one that was supposed to be sealed up tight with concrete and steel bars. Ray, I think you need to come up here, soon as this storm passes. Eleanor, listen to me. You're 12 miles from the nearest road in a blizzard. Nobody's going anywhere until this weather clears. You just sit tight, keep warm, and try to get some rest. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one watching ghost lights dance around a 77-year-old mine disaster. I spent the rest of the night at the windows, watching and listening. The bells rang every few hours, always 12 tolls, always followed by that eerie silence. And each time, I saw more lights in the valley, more shapes moving through the snow. By morning, the storm had passed, but something else had changed. The silence was wrong. In 12 years of watching this mountain, I'd learned its sounds. Birds calling, wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic on the highways below. But now, there was nothing, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I made coffee and tried to convince myself it had all been storm nerves and isolation. But when I looked out at the mining valley in the daylight, I saw something that made my hands shake so hard I nearly dropped my mug. The mine entrance that had been sealed for decades was open. The concrete barrier was cracked and pushed aside, the steel bars twisted like they were made of paper. And leading into that dark hole in the mountain was a trail of footprints in the snow. Old-fashioned boot prints, the kind with hobnails that miners used to wear. I grabbed the radio. Ray, you need to get up here, now. What's going on, Eleanor? The old mine. Someone's opened it up. That's impossible. Those seals were put in place by the state. Would take heavy equipment to break through. I stared at those impossible footprints leading into the darkness. Ray, I don't think it was someone. I think it was something. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from down in the valley, from the direction of the mine. A man's voice, full of terror and pain, echoing off the mountain walls. Then another voice, and another. Men screaming like they were trapped, like they were dying. The screams lasted for almost a minute, then cut off abruptly, leaving behind that horrible silence. Ray? Ray, did you hear that? But the radio was dead. Not static, not interference. Just dead silence, like the whole outside world had disappeared. I was alone on the mountain with whatever was down in that mine, and I was starting to understand that it wasn't something new. It was something old, something that had been waiting for 77 years to finish what it started. The bells began to ring again, but this time they sounded different. Urgent. Warning. Like they were trying to tell me to run. Ray showed up just after noon, his Jeep churning through the snow-covered fire road like a man possessed. I'd never been so happy to see another human being in my life. Eleanor, he called as he climbed out of his vehicle. You okay? I'm fine, I said, though we both knew that was a lie. But Ray, something's happening down in that valley. Something bad. Ray was a practical man, spent 30 years with the Forest Service and seen just about everything these mountains could throw at you. But when I showed him the opened mine entrance through my binoculars, his face went pale. "That's not possible," he muttered. "I helped inspect those seals myself 5 years ago. Solid concrete, steel reinforcement. Would take a construction crew with heavy equipment to break through like that. Look at the tracks, Ray." He studied the footprints leading into the mine, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Those look old-fashioned, real old-fashioned. 1902 old-fashioned." He lowered the binoculars and looked at me. "Eleanor, I know you've been under stress with the divorce and all, but you're talking about ghosts now. Then explain the footprints. Explain the bells. Explain how a sealed mine opened itself up in the middle of a blizzard." Before he could answer, we both heard it. The sound of picks and shovels working stone, echoing up from the valley. The rhythmic chink, chink, chink of men digging, like there was a full crew working down there. Ray's face went white. "Nobody's supposed to be down there. That mine's been dead for 77 years. The bells, Ray, listen." They started again, those 12 slow tolls. But this time we could hear something else underneath them, voices calling out, men shouting warnings in the distance. And then, clear as anything, we heard the sound of an explosion. A deep, rumbling boom that shook the windows of my tower. "Gas explosion," Ray whispered, "just like 1902. But there was no smoke, no flash of light, nothing to show that anything had actually blown up. Just the sound, echoing through the valleys like an echo from the past. That's when we saw them. Men in old-fashioned mining clothes walking out of the woods below. Their faces were pale, their clothes covered in coal dust, and they moved with the slow, purposeful gait of people who had all the time in the world. There were dozens of them, maybe more, all heading toward the opened mine. "Ray, are you seeing this?" He was gripping the binoculars so hard his knuckles were white. "I see them. God help me, I see them." One of the figures stopped and looked up toward our tower. Even from that distance, I could see his face clearly. It was a young man, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a sad smile. He raised his hand and waved at us like he was greeting old friends. Then he pointed toward the mine and shook his head like he was trying to warn us about something. "They're trying to tell us something," I said. "Dead men don't tell anybody anything," Ray muttered, but his voice was shaking. The bells started ringing again, but faster this time, more urgent. And with each toll, more miners appeared from the woods. They were all heading toward the mine, all carrying the tools of their trade, picks, shovels, safety lamps that flickered with impossible light. That's when I realized what was happening. "Ray, they're not trying to hurt us. They're trying to warn us, just like that bell ringer in 1902. Warn us about what? I thought about the pattern I'd been hearing. 12 bells, 12 tolls. "How many people are up here on the mountain right now, Ray, besides us?" His face went pale as he understood. "There's a hunting party from Richmond. 3 guys came up yesterday before the storm. And old Pete Morrison, he's got a cabin about 5 miles south of here, sometimes comes up to check his traps. And your maintenance crew? Jimmy Dalton and Marcus Webb. They were supposed to fix some equipment at the ranger station today." I counted on my fingers. "That's 7 people, Ray. 7 people on the mountain." "So?" "The explosion in 1902 killed 83 miners. But it also killed 7 other people who were in the area. The bell ringer, his family, some travelers who got caught in the blast zone." Ray stared at me. "You think those things down there are trying to recreate the original disaster?" Before I could answer, my radio crackled to life. But instead of voices, it was playing that hymnal music again. And underneath the music, I could hear men praying, their voices mixing together in a chorus of fear and desperation. "This is Jimmy Dalton," a panicked voice suddenly broke through the music. "Anybody out there? We're trapped in the ranger station. Something's happening here. Something impossible. The building's shaking, and we can hear explosions underground. It's like the whole mountain's coming apart." Ray grabbed the radio mic. "Jimmy, this is Ray. What's your situation?" "Ray! Thank God we can't get out, boss. The doors won't open and the windows are sealed shut somehow. And Ray, we can see people outside. Men in old mining clothes, just standing there watching us. They look dead, Ray. The radio went silent. Jimmy? Jimmy, come in. Nothing but static. Then the hymnal music started again. That's when I understood the full horror of what was happening. The dead miners weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were trying to save people, trying to warn them just like they'd been warned in 1902. But something else was here. Something that wanted the disaster to happen again. Something that fed on death and tragedy. The bells stopped ringing, and in the sudden silence I heard a new sound. Footsteps on the tower stairs. Slow, heavy footsteps, like someone climbing toward us. But we were the only two people in the tower. Ray pulled out his service revolver, his hands shaking. Eleanor, get behind me. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and the door to our observation room slowly opened. A man stepped through, tall, gaunt, dressed in a black coat that looked like it belonged to another century. His face was pale as snow, his eyes deep and dark as mine shafts. When he smiled, I saw teeth like broken glass. Good afternoon, he said in a voice like winter wind. I believe you've been hearing my bells. That's when I knew we were in the presence of death itself. The man in black studied us with those terrible dark eyes, and I felt like I was looking into an open grave. You must be Eleanor Ashford, he said, his voice carrying the sound of dirt falling on coffin lids. I've been listening to you listen to me. Perfect pitch, isn't it? A gift that lets you hear things others miss. Ray had his gun pointed at the stranger, but his hand was shaking so badly I doubted he could hit anything. Who are you? How did you get up here? The man smiled, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. I am the bell ringer, Mr. Coleman. I have been ringing my bells for 77 years, marking time until this moment. The explosion, I whispered. You caused the explosion in 1902. I feed on tragedy, Miss Ashford, on fear, on death, on the moment when hope turns to despair. The mining explosion was satisfying. 83 souls, all crying out at once as the mountain came down on them, but 7 others were supposed to die that day and they escaped. The balance was not complete. Ray fired his gun. The bullet passed right through the man in black without leaving a mark. 7 people on the mountain today, the stranger continued, as if nothing had happened. The same 7 who escaped in 1902. Different bodies, but the same souls. Death has a long memory, Mr. Coleman. That's when I understood. This thing, whatever it was, had been waiting for the right combination of people to return to the mountain. It had been calling to them, drawing them here for this moment. The miners, I said. They're trying to stop you. Poor souls. They think they can change what happened, warn their friends, prevent the tragedy. But death cannot be cheated, only delayed. And I have been very patient. The building began to shake, and through the windows I could see the ghost miners surrounding the tower. They were calling out warnings, trying to tell us to run, but their voices sounded like wind through empty caves. You have perfect pitch, Miss Ashford, the death figure said. You can hear the music of the spheres, the rhythm of life and death. Would you like to hear my masterpiece? The bells began to ring again, but now I could hear the pattern. It wasn't random. It was a countdown. Each series of 12 tolls marked another person who was about to die. And with each death, the thing in black grew stronger, more solid. My radio crackled to life. Help us! It was Jimmy Dalton's voice, full of panic. The whole building's coming down. We can hear the mountain groaning like it's going to collapse. Then another voice, one of the hunters. Something's wrong with the air down here. Can't breathe. It smells like gas, like the mountain's full of poison. And another. The cabin's on fire, but there's no flame, just heat, burning us alive. One by one, the voices went silent. One by one, the thing in black smiled wider. 5 down, he said. 2 to go. Ray lunged at the creature with his bare hands, maybe thinking he could tackle it, overpower it somehow. But the moment he touched that black coat, he screamed. His body went rigid, His eyes rolled back, and I could see frost forming on his skin. He was dying, freezing to death in the middle of winter, just like those miners who got trapped when the ventilation system failed. "Ray!" I grabbed him, trying to pull him away from the death figure, and the cold hit me like a physical blow. It was the cold of the grave, of absolute zero, of the space between stars. But I held on, and I started to sing. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe desperation. But I sang one of those old hymns, the ones I'd heard on the radio. My voice cut through the supernatural cold like a warm knife, and for just a moment, the thing in black stepped backward. "Interesting," it said. "Music, the one thing that exists in both worlds, that can bridge life and death." Ray was still breathing, but barely. I kept singing, pouring all my training, all my perfect pitch, all my love for music into that old hymn. And something amazing happened. The ghost miners outside began to sing with me. Their voices joined mine, creating a harmony that made the tower windows vibrate. The thing in black was backing away, its face twisting with something that might have been pain. "The bells," I realized. "Your bells are music too, and I can hear the true rhythm." The creature's bells weren't just marking death. They were creating it, using sound to tear holes between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But music could work both ways. It could heal as well as harm. I changed my song, matching my voice to the rhythm of the bells, but inverting the melody. Instead of a death march, I sang a song of life, of hope, of resurrection. The ghost miners sang louder, their voices growing stronger with each note. "No," the thing in black hissed. "The pattern must be completed. 7 souls owe death a debt." "Then take mine," I said, still singing. "Take mine instead of Ray's." The creature paused, considering. "You would die for him?" "I would die for all of them. For the miners, for the people on this mountain, for everyone your bells have marked." "Eleanor, don't," Ray whispered. But I could see him getting stronger as my song pushed back the sup. "Air natural cold." The thing in black smiled. "Very well. 1 life freely given is worth 7 taken. Your perfect pitch will make a lovely addition to my eternal chorus." It reached for me, and I felt that terrible cold begin to seep into my bones. But just as I was about to give up, to let the darkness take me, I heard something that changed everything. The church bell was ringing again, but not the death knells. This was different. This was the original bell, the one the bell ringer in 1902 had been trying to ring to warn the miners. And it was ringing the pattern of escape, the signal that meant, get out now. The thing in black spun around, its face twisted with rage. "Impossible! That bell was destroyed in the explosion." "No," I said, understanding flooding through me. "It was saved. The original bell ringer wasn't your servant. He was fighting you. He's been fighting you for 77 years, trying to save people from your countdown." The ghost of the real bell ringer appeared behind the creature, a young man with sad eyes and gentle hands. He was holding a rope, and at the other end was a bell made of pure light. "My watch is ended," he said simply, and rang the bell one final time. The sound shattered the death figure like glass, and with a scream that shook the mountain, it dissolved into smoke and shadow. The supernatural cold disappeared, the ghost miners faded away with peaceful smiles, and the tower stopped shaking. It was over. But as the last echoes of that final bell toll faded away, I realized something had changed in me. I could still hear the music between worlds, could still sense the rhythm of life and death. The perfect pitch that had saved us was now something more. I had become the mountain's new guardian, its early warning system against the supernatural. And somewhere in the distance I could swear I heard other bells beginning to ring. Ray recovered, though he never talked much about what happened in that tower. The official report blamed the deaths on carbon monoxide poisoning from disturbed mine shafts. The Hun Ting party was found in their tent, peaceful as if they'd just gone to sleep. Jimmy and Marcus were discovered at the ranger station, overcome by fumes from a faulty heater. Old Pete was in his cabin, same story. Natural gas leaks, they said. Tragic accident. They sealed the mine again, this time with enough concrete to build a dam. The fire tower was decommissioned and I was transferred to a desk job in Charleston. Too much stress from isolation, they said. Too much time alone on the mountain. But I know the truth. 6 months later, I quit the Forest Service and bought a small cabin near the base of Misery Mountain. I couldn't leave, couldn't abandon my post, because I can still hear things others miss, and now I know what to listen for. The bells ring sometimes, in other parts of the mountains. Different bells, different rhythms, but always the same pattern. Death looking for its due, supernatural forces trying to collect old debts. And when I hear them, I do what the original bell ringer tried to do in 1902. I warn people. Sometimes it's a phone call to the sheriff's office about hikers in the wrong area at the wrong time. Sometimes it's a tip to the weather service about unusual conditions that need investigating. Sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right moment to guide someone away from danger they can't see coming. The mountain remembers everything, and sometimes it tries to warn us through people like me. People who can hear the music between worlds, who can listen to the rhythm of life and death and know when the pattern's wrong. I keep my old radio tuned to the emergency frequencies, and every morning I climb up to a high ridge where I can see the fire tower. It stands empty now, windows boarded up, but I swear sometimes I can see a light in the observation room. A gentle light, like a safety lamp carried by a miner who's finally found his ways. Home. The original bell ringer is at rest now. His 77-year vigil is over. But the job he started, protecting people from the things that hunt in the darkness, that job continues. Because death isn't the only thing that echoes in these mountains. Love echoes too. Courage echoes. Sacrifice echoes. And sometimes, if you know how to listen, you can hear all of them ringing at once, a harmony that pushes back against the darkness and keeps people safe. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and I listen to the mountains. They have so much to say if you just know how to hear. My name is Samuel Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. I've seen drunk hikers fall off cliffs, found lost kids after 3 days in the wilderness, and pulled more dead bodies out of these mountains than I care to count. But nothing prepared me for what happened at Copper Creek Canyon in the summer of 1987. I should tell you about myself first, so you understand why this story matters. I'm Cherokee, born and raised in these North Carolina mountains. My grandmother used to tell me the old stories when I was little, about the raven mockers and the old ways. But I grew up modern, went to college, became a cop on the tribal police force before joining the Park Service. I respected the old stories, but I didn't really believe them. Skinwalkers were Navajo legends anyway, not Cherokee, and they definitely weren't real. That August was the worst drought anyone could remember. The Great Smoky Mountains looked like a tinderbox with fire danger at critical levels. The air hung thick and yellow with smoke from distant fires, and even the deepest streams were running at record lows. I was working cultural resource protection that summer, which meant keeping an eye on the Cherokee sacred sites scattered throughout the park. Copper Creek was one of my regular patrol areas, 3,600 feet up in the backcountry, where the old copper veins run through the rock like green blood. The place had history, bad history. Back in 1838, when the government forced the Cherokee off their lands, many families tried to hide in these remote canyons. Most of them died up there from cold, hunger, or the soldiers who hunted them down. The area around Copper Creek was dotted with burial sites, some marked, most not. Ancient ceremonial grounds that my people had used for hundreds of years before the white man came. I was checking the area every few days that summer because we had reports of artifact hunters, low-life grave robbers who thought they could make a quick buck selling Cherokee pottery and tools to private collectors. It made my blood boil every time I found evidence of their digging. The morning everything started, I got a radio call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the lead archaeologist on a university expedition that had permission to document some of the sites. Her voice sounded shaky through the static. "Ranger Blackthorne? We've got a problem up here." I keyed the radio. "What kind of problem, Dr. Mitchell?" "Someone's been moving our equipment overnight, tools scattered around, grid stakes pulled up. But that's not the weird part. She paused, and I heard papers rustling in the background. We found footprints around the burial site, human prints that change. Change how? They start human, then become bear tracks, then wolf. All from the same set of prints, like something was shifting as it walked. I rolled my eyes. City people always got spooked in the wilderness. Could be different animals following the same path, Doc. Bears will step in human tracks sometimes. That's what we thought too. But Ranger Blackthorn? Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. We heard singing last night. Cherokee singing, coming from the burial ground. Ancient songs none of us recognized. A cold finger ran down my spine despite the 95-degree heat. My grandmother had taught me some of the old songs, and I knew enough Cherokee to recognize funeral chants when I heard them. But there were no Cherokee living up in that remote area. I'll be up there in 2 hours, I told her. Don't touch anything until I arrive. As I drove the winding mountain road toward Copper Creek, I tried to push down the uneasiness growing in my chest. The radio crackled with reports of more lightning strikes knocking out communication towers. If things kept up, we'd be completely cut off from the outside world until the weather cleared. I reached the trailhead just as the sun hit its peak. The heat was brutal, but as I hiked toward the archaeological site, I noticed something strange. The temperature seemed to drop as I got closer to the burial grounds. By the time I reached Dr. Mitchell's camp, I actually felt cold, which should have been impossible in that heat. The team had set up their equipment in a meadow about a quarter-mile from the main burial site. Dr. Mitchell met me at the edge of camp, a middle-aged woman with prematurely gray hair and worried eyes. "Thank God you're here," she said. "Things have gotten worse since I called." She led me to their work area, where survey equipment lay scattered like a tornado had hit it. Grid stakes had been pulled from the ground and arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. Measurement tape was wound around trees in complex spirals. But what made my skin crawl were the footprints she'd mentioned. They were clear as day in the soft earth, human feet, size 11 or 12, walking normally for about 20 yards. Then the stride changed, lengthened, and the prints became something else. Bare paws, massive ones. After another 20 yards, they shifted again, becoming wolf tracks, all from the same walker, following the same line toward the burial ground. "Could be a hoax," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. "Someone with different animal feet tied to their boots." Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "Look at the depth and spacing. These prints show the natural gait of each animal. You'd need to be a master tracker to fake this." That's when I noticed something else. The copper veins in the exposed rock faces seemed to be glowing with a faint green light. I'd seen copper ore before. My great-grandfather had mined these mountains in the 1920s. But I'd never seen it phosphoresce like that. "Doc," I said slowly, "how long have those rocks been glowing?" She followed my gaze and went pale. "They weren't doing that yesterday." That night, I set up camp with the archaeological team instead of hiking back to my truck. Something about the situation didn't feel right, and I wanted to keep an eye on things. Dr. Mitchell had 4 people with her, 2 graduate students, a photographer, and an elderly Cherokee man named Joseph Swimmers, who served as their cultural consultant. Joseph was someone I respected. He was a traditional keeper, one of the few people left who remembered the old ways. When I asked him about the strange tracks and the glowing copper, his weathered face went grim. "Bad things happened here long ago," he said in his careful English. "Some wounds in the earth never heal." "What kind of bad things?" Joseph was quiet for a long time, staring into our campfire. "In the old days, before the soldiers came, there was a medicine man named Koga. He was powerful, but he chose the dark path. Practiced forbidden magic, stole years from dying people to make himself stronger. I'd heard whispers of such things from my grandmother, Cherokee shamans who became corrupted, turning into something called raven mockers. They were said to eat the hearts of the dying and steal their remaining years of life. When the soldiers came to force our people west, most Cherokee went. Some hid in the mountains and died slow deaths from hunger and cold. But Koga," Joseph's voice dropped. "Koga made a bargain with dark spirits. He stayed in these mountains, feeding on the life force of anyone who disturbed the burial sites, getting stronger, living longer than any man should. "Joseph," I said gently, "that's just an old story." The old man looked at me with eyes that seemed ancient. "Is it, nephew?" "Then explain the tracks. Explain the singing. Explain why the copper glows with spirit light." Before I could answer, we heard it. A voice echoing through the canyon, singing in Cherokee. The words were old, older than anything I'd learned from my grandmother. It was a funeral song, but wrong somehow, twisted into something that made my teeth ache. Dr. Mitchell grabbed my arm. "That's what we heard last night." The singing went on for maybe 10 minutes, rising and falling like wind through the trees. When it finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than before. Even the crickets had gone quiet. "We should leave," whispered Amy, one of the graduate students. "Pack up tonight and get out of here." Part of me agreed with her. Every instinct I had was screaming that this place was dangerous. But I was a park ranger. I had a job to do. "Nobody's leaving," I said. "Whatever's going on here, we'll figure it out in the morning." I should have listened to Amy. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of ravens calling. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. I grabbed my flashlight and crawled out of my tent. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. I could see the ravens perched in the trees around our camp, more birds than I'd ever seen in one place. Their eyes reflected my flashlight beam like tiny mirrors, and they were all staring at us. That's when I saw him. At the edge of our camp, just beyond the firelight, stood a man. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like traditional Cherokee clothing. But there was something wrong with the way he stood, the way his arms hung too long at his sides. His eyes glowed the same green color as the copper in the rocks. "Samuel Blackthorne," he called out, and his voice carried perfectly despite the distance. "You carry Cherokee blood. You should know better than to let these strangers disturb the dead." I fumbled for my radio, but it was just static. The lightning strikes had finally killed our communications. "Who are you?" I called back. The man smiled, and his teeth seemed too sharp in the moonlight. "I am the guardian of this place. I have been watching over the burial grounds for many lifetimes. These white archaeologists dig where they should not dig, take what they should not take." Dr. Mitchell, head C, rolled out of her tent and stood beside me. "We have permits," she said loudly. "We're documenting the sites for preservation." The man laughed, and the sound made the ravens call louder. "Preservation. You preserve by forgetting, by leaving the dead in peace. Instead, you measure and photograph and catalog, turning sacred ground into museum displays." He started walking toward us, and with each step, his shape seemed to shift slightly. One moment he looked human, the next his shadow on the ground was wrong, too large, with wings instead of arms. "Leave now," he said, "and I will let you go unharmed. But if you stay, if you continue to disturb my people's rest, I will take from you what you have taken from them." Joseph Swimmers emerged from his tent, carrying what looked like a leather pouch. "You are Koga," he said in Cherokee. "The Raven Mocker. My grandfather told me stories of you." The man's glowing eyes fixed on Joseph. "Ah, one who remembers the old ways. Yes, I am Koga. And I remember your grandfather. He was wise enough to stay away from this place." Joseph opened his pouch and began pulling out what looked like small bones and colored stones. "These people are under my protection, old one. They mean no harm to the dead." Koga tilted his head, and for a moment he looked exactly like a giant raven studying prey. "Protection? From one old man with medicine bag tricks?" He raised his arm, and every raven in the canyon began calling at once. The sound was deafening, like standing inside a thunderstorm. When the calling stopped, Koga was gone, but his voice echoed from everywhere at once. "1 week. Leave in 1 week, or face the consequences." We spent the rest of the night huddled around the fire, watching the tree line. None of us slept. When dawn finally came, half the ravens were still perched in the trees around our camp, watching us with those mirror-bright Yes. Dr. Mitchell wanted to pack up immediately, but I convinced her to stay one more day. I needed to understand what we were dealing with, and running away wouldn't solve anything if there really was someone, or something, threatening people in my park. It was my job to handle it. That was the first mistake that cost lives. The next morning, we found Tom Bradley dead. Tom was the team's photographer, a quiet guy in his 30s who loved getting up early to catch the sunrise. When he didn't show up for breakfast, we went looking and found him about 100 yards from camp, lying next to his camera equipment. At first glance, he looked like he'd had a heart attack. He was on his back, arms crossed over his chest, face peaceful. But when Dr. Mitchell checked for a pulse, she jerked her hand back like she'd touched something hot. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "Look at him." Tom's brown hair had turned completely white overnight. His face, which had been young and smooth yesterday, was now lined with deep wrinkles. He looked like he'd aged 40 years in a single night. But the worst part was his chest. His shirt had been torn open, and where his heart should have been, there was nothing but a neat, bloodless hole, like someone had reached in and plucked it out with surgical precision. "What the hell could do this?" Amy asked. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Joseph knelt beside the body, examining the wound without touching anything. "Raven mocker," he said quietly. "They eat the hearts of their victims and steal their remaining years. Tom here had maybe 40 years left to live. Now Koga has them." I wanted to argue, to find some rational explanation. But the evidence was right there in front of us. The wound was too clean for an animal attack, too precise for any human killer. And the aging, no disease or poison, could do that overnight. "We need to get out of here," Dr. Mitchell said. "Right now." I nodded, ready to agree. But when we got back to camp and tried to start packing, we discovered our first real problem. During the night, while we'd been focused on the strange encounter with Koga, someone or something had sabotaged our equipment. The tires on their Jeep had been slashed, not with a knife, but with claws that left deep gouges in the rubber. Our radio equipment was smashed beyond repair. The GPS devices were missing. Even our paper maps had been shredded. "He doesn't want us to leave," Joseph said. "The hunting has begun." That's when the forest fire started. We saw the smoke first, a black column rising from the direction of the main road. Within hours, the wind had picked up, and the fire was spreading fast through the drought-dried underbrush. Soon we could hear the crackle of flames and the crash of burning trees. I climbed up on a rocky outcrop to get a better view and felt my heart sink. The fire was between us and the trailhead, cutting off our only exit route. We were trapped in the canyon with no way to call for help and no way out on foot. "How long before it reaches us?" Dr. Mitchell asked when I climbed back down. "Maybe 2 days if the wind stays steady. Less if it picks up." Amy started crying then. "We're going to die up here." "No," Joseph said firmly. "But we need to understand the rules we're playing by. Koga isn't just trying to scare us away anymore. He's hunting us." As if to prove Joseph's point, we found the second body that afternoon. Marcus, one of the graduate students, had volunteered to hike up to higher ground to see if he could get a cell phone signal. We found him 3 hours later, about half a mile from camp. Like Tom, he'd been aged decades overnight, his heart removed with impossible precision. But this time, there were other signs. The ground around Marcus's body was covered with tracks, human footprints that became raven claws, then wolf pads, then human again. And carved into a nearby oak tree, about 8 feet up, was a message in Cherokee. Joseph typed and slated, "2 warnings given, 3 remain. Leave or join the dead." 3 remain? Dr. Mitchell counted on her fingers. "But there are 4 of us left." Joseph shook his head. "He doesn't count me. I carry the old blood, know the old ways. In his mind, I belong here as much as he does." That night, we didn't even try to sleep. We built the fire up high and sat in a tight circle, backs to each other, watching the darkness. The ravens had returned in even greater numbers, covering the trees like black leaves. Their eyes reflected the firelight in thousands of tiny green points. Around midnight, Koga appeared again. This time he didn't bother with the pretense of looking human. He perched in a tree about 30 feet away, and he was enormous, a raven the size of a man, with wings that blocked out the stars. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once. "Two have chosen to stay forever," he said. "3 choices remain." Dr. Mitchell stood up, holding a burning branch like a torch. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to understand," Koga replied. "For 150 years, I have protected these burial grounds from desecration. Soldiers, treasure hunters, archaeologists, all have learned to leave this place alone. But you outsiders keep coming, keep disturbing the rest of my people." "We're trying to preserve the sites," Dr. Mitchell protested, "to make sure they're protected for future generations." The giant raven laughed, and the sound was like wind through a graveyard. "You preserve by displaying in museums, by writing papers, by turning sacred ground into tourist attractions. True preservation means leaving the dead undisturbed." He spread his wings, and his shadow covered half our camp. "I made a bargain long ago to become guardian of this place. I gave up my human life, my human death, to protect what matters. The spirits gave me the power to take years from the living, to change my shape, to command the ravens and wolves." "You're insane," Amy whispered. Koga's glowing eyes fixed on her. "Am I? Or am I the only one who remembers what Tiat? These mountains truly are a cemetery, a sacred place where the bones of my ancestors rest. You walk on graves, little girl. You measure and photograph and catalog the remains of people who died protecting their homeland." He was right, and we all knew it. The entire area was filled with Cherokee remains from the Trail of Tears era. We'd been documenting burial sites all summer, treating them like archaeological puzzles instead of what they really were, the graves of people who died fighting to stay in their homeland. "What do you want us to do?" I asked. "I want you to choose," Koga said. 3 of you can leave. If you promise never to return, never to speak of this place, never to send others here. But one must stay. One must die to balance the scales." Joseph stood up slowly. "I'll stay." "No," I said immediately. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for us." The old man smiled sadly. "Nephew, I'm 83 years old. I've lived my life, raised my children, passed on the old stories. My death serves a purpose. Yours would not." But before any of us could argue further, the forest fire made the decision for us. The wind shifted during the night, and by dawn the fire was racing toward our canyon much faster than I'd predicted. We could see the orange glow through the trees, and the air was so thick with smoke we could barely breathe. "We have maybe 6 hours before it gets here," I told the others. "We need to move now." But there was nowhere to go. The fire blocked our normal exit route, and the canyon walls were too steep to climb. Our only option was to follow Copper Creek upstream to where it cut through a gap in the mountains. But that route would take us directly through the heart of the burial grounds. "He planned this," Joseph said, coughing from the smoke. "Koga called the fire spirits to trap us." "Forest fires aren't supernatural," Dr. Mitchell protested. "Lightning strikes, dry conditions. Lightning that strikes only the trees between us and safety." Joseph pointed toward the fire line. "Lightning that burns in patterns that hurt us. Exactly where he wants us to go." Looking at the fire's path, I had to admit Joseph had a point. The burn pattern was too convenient, forcing us toward the burial grounds like cattle toward a slaughter pen. We had no choice but to pack what we could carry and start hiking upstream. The trail followed Copper Creek through increasingly ancient Cherokee sites, stone circles, burial mounds, ceremonial platforms carved from living rock. With each step, the temperature seemed to drop, until we were shivering despite the approaching fire. Amy was the next to go. She was bringing up the rear, maybe 20 yards behind the rest of us, when we heard her scream. By the time we turned around, she was on her knees beside the creek, aging rapidly as we watched. Her blonde hair went gray, then white. Her smooth face cracked with wrinkles, her young body bent and withered. Standing over her was Koga in his human form. his hand pressed against her chest. We could see the glow of stolen life force flowing from Amy into him, making his own skin shine with copper-colored light. "Stop!" Dr. Mitchell shouted, running toward them. But Koga held up his free hand, and ravens began pouring out of the trees. Hundreds of them, diving at Dr. Mitchell, driving her back with their claws and beaks. By the time the ravens dispersed, Amy was dead, aged to dust beside the creek, her heart gone. Koga stood over her remains, looking younger and stronger than before. "Two choices remain," he said calmly. "The fire approaches. Decide quickly." That's when Joseph surprised us all. Instead of backing away, the old man walked directly toward Koga. From his medicine bag, he pulled out what looked like a piece of copper ore, green and glowing with the same light we'd seen in the canyon walls. "You know what this is," Joseph said in Cherokee. Koga's glowing eyes narrowed. "Sacred copper from the heart of the mount. The spirits bound you to this place with such stones. And sacred copper can unbind you," Joseph replied. He began chanting in Cherokee, words so old I could barely follow them. The copper in his hand began to glow brighter, and I could see Koga actually flinching back. "You cannot banish me, old man. I am too strong now, fed on too many years of stolen life." But Joseph kept chanting, and the copper kept glowing. Around us, the burial grounds began to respond. The stone circles lit up with the same green light. The carved platforms hummed with power. Even the copper veins in the canyon walls began to pulse like a heartbeat. "The spirits bound you here to protect the dead," Joseph called out, his voice carrying despite the growing wind. "But you have become what you were meant to guard against, a violator of sacred ground, a killer of the innocent." Koga let out a roar that was part human, part raven, part something else entirely. He began shifting rapidly between forms, man to bird to wolf to something that was all three at once. His skin cracked, revealing the copper-green light beneath. "I am the Guardian," he screamed. "I have protected this place for 150 years." "You have corrupted this place," Joseph shot back. "The spirits call for your judgment." The old man raised the glowing copper above his head, and suddenly the entire canyon was filled with voices. Cherokee voices, singing the old songs. Not the twisted funeral chants we'd heard before, but songs of peace, songs of passing, songs of rest. Koga's form began to dissolve, the stolen years of life flowing out of him like smoke. He was shrinking, aging, becoming the ancient man he truly was. But he had one final surprise. As his power faded, Koga lunged, not at Joseph, but at me. His claws, still sharp despite his weakening form, raked across my chest, tearing through shirt and skin. I felt a terrible cold rush through me, saw my own life force begin to dim. "If I cannot have my guardianship," he gasped, "I will take the Cherokee blood that should have protected this place." That's when Joseph did something I'll never forget. He threw himself between Koga and me and pressed the sacred copper directly against the creature's chest. There was a flash of green light bright enough to blind, and when my vision cleared, both Joseph and Koga were gone. All that remained was a pile of copper dust beside the creek and Joseph's medicine bag lying open on the ground. Dr. Mitchell and I stood there in shock as the Cherokee voices faded and the supernatural light died from the canyon walls. The fire was maybe an hour away now, close enough that we could feel the heat. "We need to move," I said finally. We followed the creek for another mile until we reached the gap in the mountains. From there, we could see a helicopter circling in the distance, the fire service, probably looking for survivors. I used my emergency flare gun to signal them, and within an hour, we were being airlifted to safety. The official report listed Joseph Swimmers as a victim of smoke inhalation. His body was never found, which wasn't unusual given how hot forest fires burn. Amy and the others were listed as victims of a freak animal attack followed by exposure to toxic smoke. Only Dr. Mitchell and I knew the truth. 3 months later, Dr. Mitchell's archaeological expedition was officially canceled. The university cited safety concerns and budget constraints, but I knew the real reason. Sarah had recommended that the Copper Creek sites be designated as protected Cherokee cultural areas, off limits to all future research. The National Park Service agreed without argument. Sometimes bureaucracy works in mysterious ways. I still patrol that area, but differently now. I carry one of Joseph's sacred copper pieces in my pocket, and I've learned to recognize the signs when something supernatural stirs in those ancient mountains. The old Cherokee burial grounds deserve their rest, and I make sure they get it. The copper veins in the canyon walls still glow sometimes, especially on clear nights when the moon is full. I think it's Joseph's spirit, still standing guard, but in a different way than Koga did. Joseph protects by keeping people away from danger. Koga protected by destroying anyone who came too close. Dr. Mitchell moved back to California and changed her specialty to historical preservation. We exchange Christmas cards, but we've never talked about what really happened that summer. Some things are better left unspoken, but I want you to understand something important about what I've told you. The Cherokee have been in these mountains for thousands of years. We know every stream, every cave, every sacred site. When the government forced my people west on the Trail of Tears, hundreds died rather than leave their homeland. They're still here, in the burial grounds and ceremonial sites scattered throughout the park. Those places deserve respect, not just as archaeological treasures, but as what they truly are, the graves and churches of a people who loved this land enough to die for it. I'm telling you this story because I'm getting old, and someone needs to know the truth. The rangers who take over my patrol routes need to understand that some places in these mountains are different. Some places have guardians who remember the old ways, both good and evil. The spirits that Joseph called on that night are still listening. They're still watching. And they're still deciding who belongs in their sacred places and who doesn't. Koga is gone, but he won't be the last supernatural guardian these mountains produce. The Cherokee dead have been disturbed too many times by too many people who see dollar signs instead of graveyards. Next time you're hiking in the backcountry and you come across stone circles or burial mounds, remember that you're walking on sacred ground. Show respect. Leave offerings if you know how. And if you see copper veins glowing green in the moonlight, or hear voices singing songs in a language you don't understand, don't investigate. Just turn around and walk away. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some guardians are still on duty. My name is Samuel Blackthorne, and I've been protecting Cherokee sacred sites for 21 years. I thought I knew every legend in these mountains until Copper Creek taught me that some legends are still alive, still watching, still waiting. The old ways never died. They just learned to hide better. And they're still out there, in the shadows between the trees, making sure the dead stay dead and the living remember their place. My name is Jonathan Whitehawk. I've been a park ranger for 14 years, and I thought I knew how to keep children safe in these mountains. Boy, was I wrong. I work in Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. My beat is the Screaming Creek area, way up at 3,400 feet, where the air gets thin and the trees grow thick. It's beautiful country, especially in October when the leaves turn every color you can think of. That's when families come up from Charlotte and Asheville to see the fall colors and let their kids play by the creek. I'm Cherokee, from the Eastern Band, and my grandmother used to tell me stories about these mountains when I was little. She'd talk about the little people, spirits that looked like children, but weren't really children at all. Back then, I thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off alone. I should have listened better. See, Screaming Creek got its name back in 1920. A school bus full of kids was crossing the old wooden bridge during a flash flood. The bridge washed out and the bus went into the water. 17 children drowned that day. They never found all the bodies. The creek was running too fast and too deep. People say that's why it sounds like screaming sometimes, especially when the wind hits the water just right. But I'm a practical man. I've got 2 kids of my own, Sarah, who's 8, and Tommy, who's 6. Before I became a ranger, I worked as a social worker helping kids who'd been hurt or lost. I know what real danger looks like, and it's not ghosts or spirits. It's careless adults who don't watch their children around fast water. That's what I thought anyway. The first weird thing happened on a Tuesday in early October. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm, but with that crisp feeling that makes you want to hike all day. I was doing my usual morning check of the recreation area when I found something odd. Someone had built a little dam across the creek using rocks and sticks. Not unusual. Kids do that all the time. But this dam was different. It was perfectly built, like an engineer had designed it. And it was built in the exact spot where the old school bus had gone into the water 73 years ago. I took it apart, thinking some clever kid had made it. But as I moved the rocks, I found something that made my skin crawl. Underneath the biggest stone was a small slate chalkboard, the kind they used in schools back in the 1920s. The slate was clean and dry, even though it had been underwater. Written on it in perfect white chalk were the words, "Come play with us." I've seen a lot of strange things in 14 years of ranger work. Bears that walk right up to your truck. Lightning that strikes the same tree 5 times in one storm. But I'd never seen anything that made my hands shake like that little chalkboard did. I should have reported it. Should have called my supervisor and told him about the old school slate. Instead, I threw it back in the creek and told myself it was just some kind of joke. Maybe someone from the Historical Society had dropped it, or some kid had brought it from home. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how dry that chalk had looked and how perfect the writing was. And I kept hearing my grandmother's voice telling me about the little people who lived in the water and wanted living children to come play with them forever. The next morning, 3 families were already setting up for a day by the creek when I arrived at 7 a.m. The Hendersons from Asheville had their twin boys, about 10 years old. The Millers brought their daughter Katie, who was maybe 12. And the Johnsons had brought their whole clan, grandparents, parents, and 4 kids ranging from age 5 to 15. Perfect family fun. Safe, supervised, unnormal. I should have sent them all home. The first sign of real trouble came around noon. I was checking the rope swing that hangs over the deepest part of the creek when little Katie Miller came running up to me, her face white as paper. "Mr. Ranger," she said, tugging on my sleeve, "the sad children want me to come swimming, but Mom says the water's too cold." I looked around. All the other kids were eating lunch with their families about 50 yards upstream. "What sad children, honey?" Katie pointed toward the creek. "Right there. They're wearing old-fashioned clothes, and they look really sad. They keep asking me to come play underwater games with them." I followed her pointing finger, but I didn't see anything except the creek flowing over the rocks. The water was crystal clear. You could see all the way to the bottom. No children. No anything. "I don't see any kids in the water, Katie." She stared at me like I was blind. "They're right there. The girl with the long dress is waving at you. Can't you see her?" A cold feeling crawled up my spine. I knelt down next to Katie and spoke quietly. "Honey, can you tell me what these children look like?" "There's 17 of them," Katie said, like she was reciting from memory. "They all got on a big yellow bus to go to school, but the bus fell in the water and they couldn't get out. Now they live down there and they're really lonely." My mouth went dry. I'd never told anyone about the 1920 bus accident during my safety talks. Most people didn't even know about it. But this little girl from Charlotte was describing it perfectly, right down to the number of victims. "Katie, who told you about the school bus?" "The sad girl with the braids. She said her name is Mary, and she's been waiting a really long time for new friends. She showed me where the bus is." Katie pointed to a spot in the creek that was deeper than the rest, where the water looked almost black. "It's right down there. Do you want to see it?" Before I could answer, Katie started walking toward the water. Not running like a kid would, but walking slow and steady, like someone was calling her name. I caught her arm. "Whoa there. Let's go back to your mom and dad." As I led Katie away from the creek, I looked back over my shoulder. For just a second, maybe it was a trick of the light through the trees, I thought I saw a pale face looking up at me from deep in the water. A child's face with braids, watching us walk away. But when I blinked and looked again, there was nothing. That afternoon, I talked to all the parents. I told them to keep a close eye on their kids around the water, not because of any ghost stories, but because the creek had dangerous currents that weren't always visible. Mountain water could be tricky that way. The parents nodded and smiled and promised to be careful. But I noticed the kids weren't really playing anymore. They were all standing by the creek's edge, staring down into the water like they were watching something fascinating. And they were all talking quietly to each other about the friends in the water and the games they wanted to play. When the families packed up to leave around 4 o'clock, I helped them carry their things to the parking area. That's when I found the drawings. Someone had left a whole pile of children's artwork on my truck's windshield. The drawings were done in crayon on what looked like old brown paper, the kind they might have used in schools decades ago. Each drawing showed the same thing: a yellow school bus underwater, surrounded by children in old-fashioned clothes. At the bottom of every picture, in different crayon colors, someone had written, "Come play with us," over and over. I asked all the families if their kids had left the drawings. Every parent said no. Their children had been with them all day, and none of them had brought that kind of brown paper. But here's the thing that really got to me. The drawings were bone dry. We'd had a light rain shower around 2 o'clock, and everything else in the parking area was damp. My truck was wet, the picnic tables were wet, even the trash cans were wet. But those drawings were completely dry, like they'd been protected by something. That night I called my friend Dr. Ann Rivers, a child psychologist who sometimes helped me with difficult cases. I told her about Katie Miller and the other kids and about their strange behavior around the creek. "Jonathan," she said, "children have very active imaginations. They probably overheard adults talking about local history, or maybe they saw something on the internet about the old bus accident. But Ann, the way they described it was so detailed, and they all seemed to be seeing the same thing. Mass suggestion. One child tells a story, and the others pick up on it and elaborate. It's more common than you'd think." Dr. Rivers made sense. She had a PhD and years of experience with kids. I was just a ranger who'd been spooked by some coincidences in children's drawings. But when I hung up the phone, I found myself thinking about my grandmother again. She'd always said that children could see things adults couldn't, that their eyes weren't clouded yet by too much logic and not enough wonder. Maybe some kinds of wonder weren't the good kind. 3 days later, the Johnson family came back. They'd enjoyed their first visit so much that they wanted to try camping overnight in the designated area about half a mile upstream from where the old bus had gone down. I should have said no. Should have told them the camping area was closed for maintenance, or that bears had been spotted, or any lie that would have kept them away. Instead, I helped them set up their tents. The Johnsons had 4 kids: 15-year-old Jake, 12-year-old Emma, 8-year-old Mason, and little 5-year-old Lucy. They were good kids from a good family. Mr. Johnson was a pastor from Hickory, and Mrs. Johnson taught Sunday school. They were the kind of people who said grace before meals and made sure their kids said yes, sir, and no, ma'am. Perfect family. The kind that trusted their children to be good and stay safe. I finished helping them set up camp around 6 p.m. and told them I'd check on them first thing in the morning. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the temperature was dropping fast the way it does in October. Good sleeping weather, I told them. I should have stayed all night. Around 2 a.m., my radio crackled to life. It was Mr. Johnson, and he sounded scared. "Ranger Whitehawk, we need help up here. My kids are acting really strange, and I can't wake up my wife." I threw on my clothes and drove up to their campsite as fast as I could on the winding dirt road. When I got there, I found something that still gives me nightmares. Mrs. Johnson was unconscious in their tent, breathing but completely unresponsive. The 4 children were standing by the creek in their pajamas, holding hands in a line, staring down into the black water. They weren't shivering, even though the temperature had dropped to about 40 degrees. "Kids," I called out, "come away from the water." None of them moved. It was like they couldn't hear me. Mr. Johnson grabbed my arm. "They've been like this for an hour," he whispered. "I can't get them to respond. And Jonathan, they're not alone down there." I followed his pointing finger and felt my heart stop. There were other children in the water, not on the bank with the Johnson kids, but actually in the creek, standing underwater like it was air. I could see them clearly in the moonlight. 17 children in old-fashioned clothes, looking up at the Johnson kids with pale, eager faces. As I watched, one of the underwater children, a girl with braids, just like Katie Miller had described, reached up toward the surface. Little Lucy Johnson let go of her brother's hand and started walking into the water. "Lucy, no!" I ran and caught her around the waist, pulling her back from the creek. The moment I touched her, she snapped awake and started crying. "I want to play with Mary. She promised to show me her dollhouse under the water." One by one, I pulled the other Johnson children away from the creek. As soon as I touched each one, they woke up like they'd been sleepwalking. They were all confused and cold, with no memory of how they'd gotten outside their tents. But when I looked back at the water, the 17 children were gone. Mr. Johnson helped me get his kids wrapped in blankets and warmed up by their camp stove. Mrs. Johnson woke up around 3 a.m. with a terrible headache and no memory of the past few hours. "We're leaving," Mr. Johnson said. "Something's not right here." I helped them pack up in the dark and followed their car down the mountain to make sure they got out safely. As we drove away, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see small figures following us down the road. The next morning, I called my supervisor and requested a meeting. I was going to tell him everything. The drawings, the children's stories, what I'd seen at the Johnson campsite. I was going to recommend that we close the Screaming Creek area until we could figure out what was happening. But when I walked into his office, there was someone else there waiting for me. Dr. Ann Rivers had driven up from Asheville. "Jonathan," she said, "I've been thinking about our phone conversation, and I'd like to interview some of the children who've been having these experiences. From a professional standpoint, this could be a fascinating case study in group psychology." My supervisor was nodding enthusiastically. "Dr. Rivers thinks this could help us understand how local legends affect children's behavior. It might even lead to better safety education programs." So instead of closing Screaming Creek, we decided to study it. God help us, we decided to study it. Dr. Rivers set up a temporary research station in the ranger office and put out word that she wanted to talk to families whose children had experienced anything unusual at the creek. Within 2 days, we had more responses than we could handle. It turned out Katie Miller wasn't the first child to see things in the water. Over the past 3 years, dozens of kids had reported seeing sad children in Screaming Creek. Parents had written it off as imagination or the result of local ghost stories. But Dr. Rivers discovered something that made my blood run cold. Every single child who'd had an encounter gave the same exact details about the 17 children underwater. Same names, same descriptions of their clothes, same story about the school bus. Even kids who'd never heard the local legend before were describing Mary with the braids, and Tommy who wore suspenders, and little Sarah who lost her lunchbox in the water. "This is impossible," Dr. Rivers said, spreading out interview notes across her desk. "Children this age don't have the capacity for such detailed, consistent shared delusions. There has to be some other explanation." I wanted to tell her that my grandmother would have had a very simple explanation. But Dr. Rivers was a scientist, and I was just a ranger who was starting to believe in things that couldn't exist. That's when 8-year-old Mason Johnson disappeared. Mason had been having nightmares ever since the camping trip. His parents brought him back to Dr. Rivers for a follow-up interview, hoping she could help him process what he'd experienced. The interview was supposed to be safe. It was 11 a.m. on a sunny Thursday. Dr. Rivers was there with her recording equipment, and I was keeping watch. Mason's parents were sitting right outside the office door. Everything should have been fine. "Mason," Dr. Rivers said gently, "can you tell me about the children you saw in the water?" Mason nodded seriously. He was a quiet kid with dark hair and his father's earnest eyes. "They're not mean," he said. "They're just really lonely. Mary says they've been waiting so long for new friends to play with. What kind of games do they want to play? Water games. Hide and seek underwater. Tea parties in the caves under the creek. Mary says there's a whole school down there with desks and everything, and they need more kids to fill up the empty seats." Dr. Rivers was taking notes, nodding encouragingly. "That sounds interesting. Did Mary say anything else?" Mason's eyes got that distant look I'd seen before in kids who'd encountered the shadow children. "She says I can come visit any time I want. She says the water doesn't hurt if you're friends with them. She says—" Mason stopped talking mid-sentence. His eyes went completely blank, and he stood up from his chair like he was being called. "Mason?" Dr. Rivers reached for him, but he was already walking toward the door. I tried to intercept him, but the kid moved faster than should have been possible. He slipped past me and out the door, past his confused parents, and straight toward the creek. By the time we caught up, Mason was already waist-deep in the water, walking steadily toward the deepest part where the current was strongest. "Mason!" his mother screamed. "Come back!" But Mason couldn't hear her, or wouldn't. He kept walking deeper, the water rising to his chest, then his shoulders. I kicked off my boots and dove in after him. The creek was freezing cold and moving fast. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I saw when I went underwater. They were all there, all 17 of them, standing in a circle around Mason like they were welcoming him to their group. They looked exactly like the children had described, pale, wearing old-fashioned clothes, with faces that were sad and hungry at the same time. Mary, the girl with braids, reached out and took Mason's hand. When she touched him, his eyes rolled back and he stopped struggling against the current. I grabbed Mason around the waist and kicked toward the surface, but something was wrong. The creek was deeper than it should have been, and no matters. No matter how hard I swam, the surface seemed to stay the same distance away. That's when I realized we weren't in the regular creek anymore. Somehow we'd been pulled into whatever underwater world the shadow children inhabited. I could see their school bus in the distance, sitting on the bottom of an impossible deep lake. Its doors were open, and more children were getting out. Children who'd been trapped in there for 73 years, waiting for enough living kids to join them so they could finally rest. "Let him go," I managed to say, even though we were underwater and I shouldn't have been able to speak. Mary smiled at me. It was a terrible smile, full of longing and sadness and hunger. "He wants to stay," she said. "They all want to stay once they see how much fun we have down here. He's got a family, parents who love him." "So did we," said a boy in suspenders who must have been Tommy. "But nobody remembered us for very long. Nobody visits our graves or says our names. At least if he stays, we won't be forgotten." I looked at Mason. His eyes were open but empty, like he was sleepwalking. The shadow children were doing something to his mind, making him forget about his life above the water. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had taught me when I was Mason's age. Cherokee families have protection songs, chants that are supposed to keep evil spirits away from children. I'd thought they were just cultural traditions, but desperate people will try anything. I started singing the old song in Cherokee, the way my grandmother had taught me. It was about water and safety, about keeping children anchored to the living world. The effect was immediate. The shadow children hissed and backed away from the sound. Mary's grip on Mason loosened, and I saw his eyes start to clear. I kept singing and swam harder toward what I hoped was the surface. The shadows seen. Hildren followed us, reaching out with their pale hands, but they couldn't touch us while I was chanting the protection song. We broke the surface in the real creek, and I dragged Mason to the bank where Dr. Rivers and his parents were waiting. Mason was unconscious but breathing. We got him to the hospital in Asheville, where he spent 2 days in intensive care. The doctors said he'd nearly drowned and was suffering from severe hypothermia, but there was no permanent damage. When he woke up, Mason had no memory of going into the water. He remembered talking to Dr. Rivers and then waking up in the hospital. Everything in between was gone. But that night, as his family prepared to take him home, Mason asked his mother a question that made my skin crawl. "Mom," he said, "who is Mary? She keeps appearing in my room and asking when I'm coming back to play." Dr. Rivers drove back to Charlotte the next morning. She packed up her research equipment and told my supervisor that she was discontinuing the study. "There are some things," she said, "that science isn't equipped to understand." 2 days later, I found her body in Screaming Creek. Dr. Ann Rivers had come back alone in the middle of the night without telling anyone. The official report said she'd slipped on the wet rocks and drowned in the current. Accidental death. But I knew better. I found her notebook in her car, parked by the trailhead. The last entry was written in shaky handwriting, like she'd been scared or in a hurry. "The children are real, all 17 of them. They've been waiting for decades to complete their class, 20 students total. They need 3 more living children to join them before they can rest. They're getting stronger, more desperate. The living children they've touched all have a connection now. They'll keep coming back until the shadow children get what they need. The only way to stop them is to... The entry ended there, but at the bottom of the page, in different ink, someone had written, Dr. Rivers makes 18, only 2 more to go. I closed Screaming Creek recreation area that same day. Posted signs, put up barriers, called in favors to get it officially designated as unsafe due to dangerous geological conditions. My supervisor wasn't happy, but he trusted my judgment after 14 years of good service. For a while, it worked. Families stayed away, and the strange incidents stopped. But every October, when the leaves turn and the air gets crisp, I still get calls. Parents whose children wake up talking about Mary and Tommy and the other sad children who live in the water. Kids who draw pictures of school buses underwater and ask when they can go back to visit their new friends. The shadow children are patient. They've been waiting for 73 years. They can wait a little longer. Last month, I got a letter from Mason Johnson's mother. Mason is 12 now, and he's been having the dreams again. Dreams about Mary with the braids, calling his name from deep underwater. Dreams about a school where the lessons never end and recess lasts forever. We moved to Florida, Mrs. Johnson wrote. We thought distance would help, but last week Mason walked into the ocean in his sleep. A lifeguard found him 100 yards from shore, standing on the bottom, holding his breath like he was having a conversation with someone. When they pulled him out, he kept asking why Mary couldn't visit him there. I know what's happening. The shadow children marked Mason when they touched him. No matter where he goes, they'll keep calling to him. And someday, when his guard is down or his parents aren't watching, he'll answer that call. I've tried to warn other families, but who's going to believe a story about ghost children who live in a creek? Most people think I'm just a ranger who's been in the woods too long, telling tall tales to keep kids away from dangerous water. Maybe they're right. Maybe I've let local legends and coincidences turn me into a paranoid old man who sees ghosts where there are only shadows. But every night, I dream about Dr. Rivers walking into that creek in the darkness, following voices only she could hear. And I wake up wondering how many other people have heard those voices over the years. How many accidental drownings and tragic slips have really been the shadow children collecting what they need. The official count is 18 now, only 2 more to go. I'm retiring next month. 40 years old, and I'm done with these mountains. My replacement is a young guy fresh out of forestry school, full of enthusiasm and scientific explanations for everything. He thinks the old stories are charming local folklore. I haven't told him about the shadow children. I've just left him detailed notes about water safety and the importance of keeping families away from isolated swimming areas. Let him figure out the rest on his own, the way I did. Before I go, I'm having one last conversation with my grandmother. She's 93 now and lives in the Cherokee nursing home in Cherokee, North Carolina. Her mind comes and goes, but when I told her about Screaming Creek, her eyes got sharp and clear. The little people, she said, nodding. I wondered when they'd get tired of waiting. Grandmother, how do we stop them? She looked at me for a long moment. You can't stop them, Jonathan. You can only protect the living children from hearing their call. But the shadow children will keep trying until they get what they need. It's their nature. What do they need? 20 students, a full class. When they have that, they can rest and stop hunting, but until then, she shrugged sadly. Every generation has to learn the lesson again. So that's my warning to you. If you have children, teach them about water safety. Teach them about the dangers of swift currents and deep holes and slippery rocks. But also teach them that some voices calling from the water aren't meant to be answered. Some friends aren't meant for this world. And if they ever tell you about sad children who once need them to come and play underwater games, believe them, and keep them far away from any place called Screaming Creek. My name is Jonathan Whitehawk. I've been a park ranger for 14 years, and I thought I knew how to keep children safe in these mountains. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about one. There are some dangers you can't see coming, and some hungers that wait longer than human lives. The shadow children are still out there, still waiting, still calling. Don't let your children answer. My name is Richard Stonefield, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. Before that, I was military police in Vietnam. I've seen things that would make most people sick. Drug labs hidden in caves, murder scenes where animals got to the bodies first. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge in July 1984. I was 43 then, old enough to know better than to ignore my gut feelings. The Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia was my beat. Devil's Backbone was the worst part of it, a ridge system that climbed to 3,800 feet, thick with trees that hadn't seen an axe in 200 years. The ridge got its name from the way it curved like a giant spine through the mountains. Local folks said it was cursed. That July was brutal. A heat wave had been cooking the mountains for 2 weeks straight. Every day hit 100 degrees and the humidity made it feel like breathing soup. The drought had dropped the water level in streams I'd never seen so low. It exposed old foundations and settlements that had been hidden for decades. Even the buzzards seemed tired, circling lazy in the thick air. I'd heard stories about Devil's Backbone my whole life. My grandfather used to tell tales about the Hunger Hollow folk, a family that lived way back in the mountains and ate anyone who wandered into their territory. Just stories to scare kids, I figured. Mountain folklore to keep campers from going too far off the trails. The ridge had been settled by Scottish-Irish families back in the 1790s. Hard people who came to America looking for land nobody else wanted. They found it all right. The ridge was so isolated that some families went years without seeing outsiders. Rumors said they married their own cousins and sisters when nobody else was around. That kind of thing can mess with bloodlines, make people strange. But I never believed. Read the cannibal stories. Not until that summer. The first sign of trouble came on July 15th. A couple of college kids from Pennsylvania had been hiking the Ridge Trail. They were supposed to check in at the ranger station every 3 days. When day 6 came and went with no word, I knew something was wrong. I found their last campsite easy enough. These kids were neat, everything packed and organized like they taught you in Boy Scouts. But the camp was empty. Sleeping bags still in the tent, food still hanging in the bear bag. Their car keys were on the picnic table. What made my skin crawl was how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the flies seemed to stay away from that spot. In 17 years of ranger work, I'd never found a place in the woods that felt so wrong. I radioed for backup and started looking for tracks. Found some too. Boot prints heading up the ridge toward the old settlements. But mixed in with those boot prints were others. Bare feet, long and narrow like they belonged to someone who never wore shoes. The toes were spread wide with claw marks at the tips like fingernails that had grown too long. That first night I camped near the empty tent, figuring the kids might come back. Around midnight, I heard something moving in the woods. Branches breaking. Something big working its way through the underbrush, but trying to be quiet about it. I grabbed my flashlight and pistol, called out, "Hello? Anyone out there?" The sound stopped. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Clicking. Like someone making sounds with their tongue against their teeth. Back and forth, like a conversation, but not with words. The clicking moved around my camp in a circle, always staying just outside my flashlight beam. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found more tracks. Lots of them. It looked like a whole group had surrounded my camp during the night. The bare footprints were everywhere. Big ones, little ones, some so small they had to belong to children. But children don't leave claw marks in tree bark 2 feet off the ground. I followed the trail deeper into the ridge. The path got rougher as I climbed, sometimes disappearing completely where rock ledges cut across the hillside. The heat was getting worse. My water was running low, and I hadn't seen a stream in hours. Around noon, I smelled something that made me gag. Sweet and rotten, like meat left in the sun too long. I'd smelled it before in Vietnam, the smell of death. But this was stronger, thicker. It seemed to hang in the air like fog. The smell led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, even after 17 years walking these mountains. In the center was a pile of bones. Not animal bones. Human bones, picked clean and white from the sun. Arm bones, leg bones, ribs and skulls. Lots of skulls. But what really got to me were the teeth marks. Something had been gnawing on those bones. The marks were too big for animals, too regular. Human teeth marks, but bigger than they should be. Like whoever was doing the chewing had filed their teeth to points. I was taking pictures when I heard the clicking again. This time it was coming from 3 directions at once. I spun around, pistol drawn, but saw nothing except shadows between the trees. "I'm a federal ranger," I shouted. "If someone's out there, show yourself." The clicking stopped. Then I heard a sound that's stayed with me for 40 years. Laughter. High and thin, like children giggling. But wrong somehow, like they were laughing at a joke I didn't understand. I got out of there fast. Back at the ranger station, I called the state police. Detective Maria Santos drove up from Charleston that afternoon. Maria was tough, 10 years on the force, grew up in the mountains herself. She'd seen enough to not get spooked easy. But when I showed her the photos of that bone pile, her face went white. "Jesus, Rick," she said. "How many people you think this is?" I'd been thinking about that all afternoon. Hard to say, but I count at least 8 skulls. Could be more buried underneath. We went back the next morning with a full team. 3 state police officers, a forensics guy, and enough equipment to run a proper investigation. But when we got to the clearing, the bone pile was gone. Every last bone had been moved. In its place was something that made my stomach turn. Clothes, hiking boots, backpacks, all arranged in neat rows like a store display. I recognized the college kids' gear right away. Their Pennsylvania State University t-shirts were right there in the front row. "They're watching us," Maria whispered. She was right. I could feel eyes on us from the woods. The same feeling I used to get in Vietnam when Charlie was setting up an ambush. My skin was crawling. That's when Officer Davis found the cave. It was hidden behind a wall of hanging vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The opening was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Davis shined his flashlight inside and immediately stepped back, covering his nose. "Christ, that smell," he gasped. The sweet, rotten stench was pouring out of that cave like smoke from a fire. But underneath it was something else. Something that smelled like cooking meat. "We need more backup," Maria said, "and gas masks." But before we could call it in, we heard screaming. Officer Kim had been guarding our vehicles down the trail. His screams echoed through the woods, high and desperate. Then they cut off sudden like someone had flipped a switch. We ran toward the sound, crashing through brush and jumping fallen logs, found Kim's radio first, smashed to pieces on the ground, then his hat, then his gun, still in the holster. But no Kim. What we found instead were drag marks leading back toward the cave. And blood. Lots of blood, but not enough for someone to have died. Just enough to show he'd been hurt bad. "They took him," Maria said. Her voice was shaking now. "They took Kim alive." That's when we heard the clicking again, all around us, getting closer, and mixed in with it, something that might have been voices. But if they were voices, they weren't speaking any language I'd ever heard. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees, even in that blazing heat. Flies started swarming around us like we were already dead meat. "Back to back," I ordered. "Move toward the vehicles. Stay together." But the vehicles were gone. Cut brake lines, slashed tires, distributor caps ripped out. Whoever was out there knew enough about cars to make sure we weren't driving anywhere. We were trapped on Devil's Backbone Ridge with something that collected human bones and took people alive into caves that smelled like a slaughterhouse. And somewhere in those caves, Kim was probably still screaming. We made it back to the ranger station just as the sun was going down. I'd never been so glad to see electric lights and radio equipment in my life. Maria got on the horn to Charleston right away, calling for helicopter backup and a full tactical team. But the radio was full of static. Every frequency. Like something was jamming the signal. "Could be the weather," Officer Davis said. But he didn't sound convinced. The other officers, Martinez and Johnson, were checking their weapons and looking nervous. "We need to get Kim back," Maria said. He could still be alive. I knew she was right, but I also knew we were dealing with something that didn't follow normal rules. 17 years in these mountains, and I'd never seen anything move a pile of human bones overnight. Never seen anything that could coordinate an attack like that. We barricaded the ranger station as best we could, moved furniture against windows, checked all the locks, set up a watch rotation. But I kept thinking about those bare footprints circling my camp. Whatever was out there, they knew these woods better than we did. Around midnight, they came. It started with scratching sounds on the roof. Then the power went out. Emergency generator kicked in, but the lights kept flickering like something was messing with the wiring. Through the window, I saw them. Pale shapes moving between the trees, tall and thin, but wrong somehow, like people who had been stretched out too long. They moved too fast, covering ground in leaps that shouldn't have been possible. "How many?" Maria whispered. I counted at least 8, but in the flickering light, it was hard to be sure. They stayed just outside the range of our flashlights, clicking to each other like they were planning something. Then one of them stepped into the light. I've seen some ugly things in my time, but this was worse than ugly. It was what ugly becomes when it's had 200 years to get worse. The thing looked like it had been human once, but starvation and isolation had twisted it into something else. It was 7 feet tall and thin as a rail, with arms that hung down past its knees. The skin was white as fish belly, like it never saw sunlight. But the worst part was the face. Sunken cheeks, yellow eyes that reflected light like an animal's, and a mouth full of teeth that had been filed to sharp points. It was holding something in one of its long, fingered hands. Kim's badge. The thing tilted its head and made clicking sounds. The others in the trees clicked back. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. "Hungry," it said. The voice was like nails on a chalkboard. "Been hungry long time." "Where's Kim?" Maria shouted through the window. "What did you do with him?" The thing smiled, showing all those pointed teeth. "Fed the family, fed the children, still hungry." Then it was gone, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. The scratching sounds on the roof got louder, like they were trying to tear their way through the shingles. "They're coming in," Davis said. His rifle was shaking and hollow. His hands. Glass broke in the back room. Then more glass in the kitchen. Martinez fired 3 shots, the sound deafening in the small building. Something shrieked outside, high and angry. "Did you hit it?" Johnson asked. Martinez was staring out the broken window. "Yeah, but it didn't go down. Didn't even slow down much." That's when I realized we were dealing with something that bullets might not stop. These things had been surviving in the mountains for 2 centuries, eating anyone who came too close. They'd gotten strong in ways that didn't make sense. The front door started shaking like something was throwing itself against it. The barricade held, but barely. Furniture was sliding across the floor with each impact. "The cave," I said. "Kim's in that cave. If we're going to save him, it has to be now." "Are you crazy?" Davis asked. "Those things are out there waiting for us." "They're in here too," Maria said. She was right. Scratching sounds were coming from inside the walls now. They'd found a way into the building. I made the call. "We go out the back, head for the cave system, stay together, move fast, and don't stop shooting." We kicked out the back window and ran into the darkness. Behind us, the ranger station was full of clicking sounds and breaking glass. Whatever those things were, they were tearing the place apart looking for us. The woods were alive with movement, pale shapes jumping from tree to tree above our heads, eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. The clicking sounds coming from all directions now, like we were surrounded by 100 of them. Davis tripped and went down hard. When I helped him up, his leg was bleeding. "Something cut me," he gasped. I looked at the wound. 3 parallel slashes, too deep and too clean to be from branches. Something with claws had tagged him. "Keep moving," I said. But I knew we weren't going to make it. These things were herding us like sheep, driving us exactly where they wanted us to go. The cave entrance was ahead, that sick, sweet smell pouring out of it like breath from a corpse's mouth. but we calls. You'd hear something else now. Screaming. Faint, but definitely human. Kim was still alive, and he was inside that cave with whatever these things were. Maria looked at me. We have to go in. I nodded. In Vietnam, we had a saying, never leave a man behind, even if it meant walking into hell. The cave mouth swallowed our flashlight beams like they were candles. The smell was so bad that Martinez threw up right at the entrance, but we could still hear Kim screaming somewhere in the darkness ahead. Behind us, the clicking sounds were getting closer. We were trapped between the cave and the things that wanted to eat us. Time to find out what was really hiding in the belly of Devil's Backbone Ridge. The cave was worse than anything I'd imagined in my darkest nightmares. The walls were covered with scratches, not random marks, but symbols and drawings that looked like they'd been made over generations. Stick figures of people being hunted, larger figures with pointed teeth eating smaller ones. A family tree drawn in what looked like dried blood. The deeper we went, the stronger the smell got. Sweet rot mixed with cooking meat and something else. Something like wet dog and old sweat. The smell of things that had lived too long without soap or sunlight. Our flashlights picked out details I wished I couldn't see. Piles of clothing from different decades, hiking gear from the 70s, military uniforms that looked Vietnam era, even older stuff that might have been from the 50s. All of it sorted and stacked like a museum display. Jesus Christ, Martinez whispered. How long have they been doing this? The cave branched into tunnels that went deeper into the mountain. We followed Kim's screams, getting louder as we moved toward what had to be the main chamber. The clicking sounds behind us were getting closer too. They were hurting us, I realized, driving us exactly where I wanted us. The main chamber was huge, big enough to hold a church service, and it was full of them. I counted 12 of them, ranging from what looked like kids to an ancient thing sitting on a throne made of human bones. The old one was the worst. So thin he looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. But his eyes were bright yellow and full of intelligence that was older and hungrier than anything human. Kim was there, tied to a wooden post in the center of the chamber. He was hurt bad, cuts all over his arms and legs that were still bleeding. But he was alive. Barely. Around the chamber were other posts, other people tied up, but these ones weren't moving. College kids, hikers, even what looked like a family with 2 small children, all dead, all showing bite marks. Welcome, the old one said. His voice was like rocks grinding together. Been expecting you. Rangers always come looking, always taste good. The others in the chamber started clicking excitedly. Kids with filed teeth grinned at us from the shadows. Women with wild hair and crazy eyes held knives made from sharpened bones. This is our family, the old one continued. Been feeding our family since the first settlers came through these mountains. 200 years of good eating. You're just the latest meal. I raised my rifle, but before I could fire, the whole family moved. They were faster than anything I'd ever seen, covering the distance between us in leaps that seemed to ignore gravity. Johnson got 1 shot off before they swarmed us. Martinez went down first, 3 of them on him at once. I heard him screaming, then not screaming anymore. Davis tried to run back toward the tunnel, but they caught him before he made it 10 feet. Maria and I found ourselves back to back in the center of the chamber, surrounded by things that had once been human but had turned into something else. Something that fed on people and had gotten strong doing it. The explosives, I whispered to Maria. In my pack, I had emergency charges for clearing fallen trees from trails. Military training dies hard, and I always carried more firepower than regulations said I needed. The old one was talking again, telling us about how his family had survived when civilization abandoned them. How they'd learned that human meat made them stronger, faster, harder to kill. How they'd been perfecting the art of hunting people for generations. Your friend there, he said, pointing at Kim with 1 long finger. He's been seasoning for 3 days. Terror makes the meat taste better. Fear gets into the blood, makes everything sweeter. That's when I made my move. Pulled the pin on the first charge and rolled it toward the bone throne. The old one's eyes went wide. He was smart enough to know what it was. Fire, he screamed to his family. "Fire kills us all!" The explosion lit up the cave like daylight and brought down half the ceiling. The old one was caught in the blast, his ancient body finally destroyed. Several of the others were crushed by falling rocks, but not all of them. The survivors were angry now, and angry made them even more dangerous. They came at us with everything they had: claws, teeth, bone knives, and strength that shouldn't have been possible. I got one with my rifle, but the bullet barely slowed it down. Maria emptied her pistol into another one, and it kept coming until she put one right between its yellow eyes. "The tunnel!" I shouted. "Get Kim!" Maria cut Kim loose while I held off the remaining family members with my last explosive charge. Kim was barely conscious, but he could walk with help. We ran through those tunnels with hell itself chasing us. Behind us, the cave system was collapsing from the explosion, but I could still hear clicking sounds in the darkness. Some of them had survived. At the cave entrance, the old one was waiting for us. He was half dead from the explosion, missing an arm and with burns covering most of his body. But he was still alive, still hungry, and still faster than any human should be. "Can't leave," he whispered as he came at me. "Mountain takes care of its own. Mountain keeps its secrets." I had one charge left. Used it to bring down the cave entrance with the old one still inside. The explosion echoed through the mountains like thunder, and then everything went quiet. We were free. But looking at Kim's torn body and thinking about Martinez, Davis, and Johnson, I wondered if any of us would ever really be free of what we'd seen in that cave. Some hungers, once awakened, never really die. The official report said it was domestic terrorists, a survivalist cult that had been preying on hikers for years before we finally tracked them down. The FBI sealed off Devil's Backbone Ridge and classified everything under national security. They never found the bodies of my men. They never found the real cave system either. The explosion had covered the entrance so completely that it looked like natural rockfall. The agents who came to investigate found enough evidence to support the terrorist story and didn't look any deeper. I didn't fight the cover-up. Who would believe the truth anyway? A family of cannibals living in the mountains for 200 years turned into something stronger and faster than human beings through generations of eating people. It sounded crazy even to me, and I'd lived through it. Kim survived, but he never talked about what happened in that cave. Took early medical retirement and moved to Florida. Last I heard, he was drinking too much and having nightmares. Can't say I blame him. Maria stayed on the force for another 5 years before the dreams got too bad. She calls me sometimes, usually late at night when she can't sleep. We don't talk about what we saw, but we both know it's still out there. Some of them got away when the cave collapsed. Me? I lasted another year as a ranger before I couldn't take it anymore. Every time I went into the woods, I heard clicking sounds that might have been squirrels or might have been something else. Every pile of old bones I found. It might have been deer remains, or might have been something I didn't want to think about. I live alone now, in a cabin 50 miles from the nearest town. Keep to myself mostly. But sometimes at night, when the wind is blowing through the trees just right, I hear sounds that make me check the locks on my doors and windows. The thing about isolation is that it changes people. Cut folks off from civilization long enough, and they start making their own rules about what's right and wrong, about what they need to do to survive. There are lots of mountains in this country, lots of places where families settled 200 years ago and then got forgotten by the outside world. Places where the mailman doesn't come and the power lines don't reach. Places where people might have learned to live on what they could catch. I think about that sometimes, especially when I see news stories about missing hikers in national forests, about camping families that disappear without a trace, about how many people go into the wilderness every year and just never come back out. The officials always blame it on getting lost or wild animals or accidents, and maybe they're right most of the time. But sometimes I wonder if there are other places like Devil's Backbone Ridge, other families like the one we found, other caves full of sorted clothing and old bones. The hunger doesn't just go away because you kill the oldest one in the family. Hunger like that gets passed down from parent to child, generation after generation. It becomes part of who you are, part of what you need to stay alive. I've thought about going back to Devil's Backbone Ridge, taking better equipment, more men, finishing what we started. But I'm old now and tired, and I've seen enough horror for one lifetime. Besides, the mountain has had 40 years to heal from what we did to it. 40 years for the survivors to find new caves, start new families, teach their children the old ways of hunting. Some places in this world are meant to stay wild. Some families are meant to stay hidden. And sometimes the best thing you can do is leave them alone and hope they do the same for you. But if you're ever hiking in the deep mountains and you find a clearing where no birds sing, where the air smells sweet and rotten, where human bones are scattered like fallen leaves, don't investigate. Just turn around and walk away as fast as you can, because some hungers never die, and some families never forget the taste of fear. My name is Richard Stonefield, and that's what really happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge in the summer of 1984. I'm telling you this now because I'm old and won't be around much longer to tell it. But they will be. They'll always be out there, waiting in the deep places where civilization doesn't reach. Waiting and hungry and clicking to each other in the darkness between the trees. My name is Walter Graymont, and I've been a park ranger in Virginia's George Washington National Forest for 18 years. Before that, I worked the coal mines like my daddy and his daddy before him. But after I started coughing up black stuff and the doctor said I had the beginnings of black lung, I figured it was time to find work above ground. The mountains became my office, and I loved every day of it. Well, almost every day. I'm 44 now, got twin boys I see every other weekend since the divorce. They're 12, and they think their old man's job is pretty cool. I teach hunters how to stay safe, help lost hikers find their way home, and keep an eye on the wildlife. Simple work, honest work. October 1974 was colder than usual. The weatherman kept talking about early frost warnings, and you could feel it in the air. Hunting season was about to open, and that meant my busiest time of year. Hunters would come from all over to try their luck in our woods. I'd heard all the old mountain stories growing up. My grandmother used to tell tales about the hollow folk, pale people who lived in caves and came out at night to steal children. Cherokee legends talked about white walkers who lived underground. Just stories to scare kids, I always thought. Mountain families could get pretty isolated, and sometimes they'd keep to themselves for generations. Made for strange rumors, but nothing more. The Shenandoah Valley is beautiful country, don't get me wrong. Rolling hills covered in oak and pine, valleys so green they hurt your eyes in spring, and limestone caves that go deeper than anyone's ever mapped. But there's something about the Blackstone Ridge area that always felt different. Maybe it was knowing about the old mining disaster from the 1890s. 47 men got trapped when a shaft collapsed, and they never recovered the bodies. Their families waited in Wyram. I did, but those miners were gone forever. The ridge sits at about 3,200 feet, and on foggy mornings you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. The temperature can drop 20 degrees between the valley and the ridge top. It's wild country up there with thick patches of rhododendron that grow so dense you need a machete to get through. Natural springs bubble up from underground, ice cold even in summer. That October weekend, I was getting ready for opening day. I'd already hung safety posters at all the popular spots, checked the hunting blinds, and made sure the access roads were clear. It should have been just another busy weekend keeping hunters safe and happy. But 3 different hunting parties came into my office that Friday, all telling the same strange story. They'd been scouting the ridge when they saw children watching them from cave mouths. Pale children who didn't answer when called to. All 3 parties packed up and left early, which was weird. These were serious hunters who'd paid good money for licenses. Probably just some mountain kids playing games, I told them. But something in their eyes said they weren't convinced. That's when I decided to take a ride up to Blackstone Ridge myself, just to check things out, make sure everything was normal for opening day. I loaded up my truck with safety gear, first aid supplies, and my radio, though radios don't work great in the valleys between ridges. The dirt road up to the ridge was rough as always. I passed the old warning signs about abandoned mine shafts, the ones that had been there since I started working. Trees pressed close on both sides, and the higher I got, the thicker the fog became. I should have turned around right then. Should have listened to those hunters and stayed away. But I'd never run from anything in my life, and I wasn't about to start over some kids playing in caves. I wish I had. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. In 18 years of mountain work, I'd never heard silence like that. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing, just my truck, engine, and the crunch of gravel under my tires. Even after I parked and turned off the engine, the forest stayed dead quiet. I grabbed my flashlight and clipboard and started walking the main trail. The fog was thick enough that I could barely see the orange markers on the trees. Temperature had to be down near freezing, and my breath came out in little puffs. About half a mile in, I found the first hunting blind. Someone had built it real nice in a big oak tree with a good view of the deer trails below. But when I climbed up to check it out, I got the shock of my life. There were 4 people inside, a man, a woman, and 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They were sitting there like they were waiting for deer to come by, except they weren't breathing. All 4 of them were dead, had been for weeks by the look of it. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. They weren't rotting. The cold had kept them fresh, like they were sleeping. The kids still had color in their cheeks. The parents looked peaceful, like they'd just closed their eyes for a minute. I climbed down from that blind shaking. In all my years, I'd never seen anything like it. People don't just die sitting up like that, whole families all at once. And why hadn't anyone reported them missing? I got on my radio to call it in, but all I got was static. The valleys around Blackstone Ridge were famous for dead spots. I'd have to drive back down to get a signal. But first I wanted to check the other hunting spots. Maybe this was some kind of accident, like gas from the old mines. Carbon monoxide can kill people without them even knowing it. I walked deeper into the woods, following the marked trails. The fog seemed to get thicker with every step. My flashlight beam looked weird too, like the darkness was swallowing it up after just a few feet. That's when I heard the singing. It was soft at first, like kids singing a lullaby somewhere off in the trees, but I couldn't make out the words. Didn't sound like English or even like any language I'd ever heard. Just voices, high and sweet, echoing through the fog. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone out there?" The singing stopped. I waited, listening hard, but there was nothing. Just that awful silence again. I started walking toward where I thought the voices had come from, but in that fog, it was hard to tell direction. I found a cave opening I'd never seen before, though I'd walked this trail dozens of times. It was just a dark hole in the side of the ridge, maybe 4 feet high. The kind of place kids might hide and play games. "Hello?" I called into the cave. "You kids okay in there?" My voice echoed back strange, like it was bouncing off walls far underground. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice from deep in the cave, copying exactly what I'd said. "Hello? You kids okay in there?" It sounded like my own voice, but different. Hollow. Empty. I clicked on my flashlight and pointed it into the cave. The beam seemed to get sucked into the darkness after just a few feet, but I could swear I saw something move back there, something pale that darted away from the light. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my compass to mark the location, but the needle was spinning around like a top, couldn't settle on any direction. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Compasses don't just stop working for no reason. I decided to head back to my truck and drive down for help. The dead family and the blind needed to be reported, and I needed backup to check out these caves proper. But as I turned to leave, I saw them. Children's drawings, scratched into the rock wall beside the cave entrance. Crude stick figures, the kind any kid might draw. But these pictures showed something that made my stomach drop. Normal-looking children holding hands with pale, thin figures. And the pale figures were leading the normal children down into dark places under the ground. Some of the drawings looked old, like they'd been carved into the rock years ago. Others looked fresh. I ran back to my truck faster than I'd run in 20 years. My radio still wouldn't work, and the fog was getting so thick I could barely see the road. But I had to get help. Had to tell someone about the dead family and the strange caves. As I drove down the mountain, I kept checking my rearview mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. But every time I looked, all I saw was fog. I made it to the ranger station just as the sun was setting. Called the county sheriff and the coroner, told them about the dead family, told them we needed a full search of the caves up there. But I didn't tell them about the singing, or the voice that copied mine, or the drawings of pale children leading normal ones underground. I should have. God help me. I should have. Sheriff Morrison brought 3 deputies and the coroner up to Blackstone Ridge the next morning. The fog had cleared some, but it was still cold enough to see your breath. Jake Morrison had been sheriff for 12 years, and we'd worked together on plenty of mountain rescues. Good man, careful and smart. Hell of a thing, Walter, he said, as we hiked up to the hunting blind. Whole family just dying like that. Gets stranger, I told him, and led them to the cave with the drawings. Jake studied the scratched pictures with his flashlight. Kids do love to draw on rocks, he said, but I could tell the images bothered him too. You think some mountain family's been living rough up here? Maybe. But Jake, there's something else. I heard singing yesterday. Children's voices, coming from deep in this cave. He looked at me like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. We rappelled down into the cave opening, Jake and me with ropes and proper lights. The cave went back further than I'd expected, opening up into a big chamber about 30 feet down. Our lights showed limestone walls covered with more drawings, hundreds of them, going back who knows how long. But these weren't children's drawings. These showed the whole story. Men with pickaxes going into tunnels, cave-ins trapping them underground, the trapped men getting thinner and paler, then the pale men coming up at night taking children from the surface, the children getting pale too, joining the underground people. Jesus, Jake whispered. How long have people been making these? I ran my light over the different sections. Some drawings looked old enough to be from the 1890s mining disaster. Others looked like they were made last week. That's when we found the first bones. Human bones scattered around the cave floor. Some big, some small. Too many to count in the dim light. Jake picked up what looked like a child's skull, turned it over in his hands. Teeth are filed to points, he said quietly. What kind of people file their teeth? The temperature in the cave had to be 20 degrees colder than outside. Our breath came out in big white puffs. But there was something else making me shiver, the feeling that we weren't alone down there. Sheriff, one of his deputies called from deeper in the cave. You need to see this. We followed his voice through a narrow passage that opened into another chamber. This one had been lived in recently. Sleeping areas made from old blankets and animal skins. Crude tools carved from bone, and stacks of children's clothing, sorted by size. Fresh children's clothing. My God, Jake said. There really are people living down here. That's when we heard the singing again. Multiple voices this time, echoing from somewhere deeper in the cave system. That same strange lullaby, but now I could tell there were at least 6 or 7 different voices, all high and sweet, like children. But something about them made my skin crawl. Jake drew his service weapon. Hello, he called out. This is the sheriff. We need to talk to you. The singing stopped instantly. Then we heard something that made us all freeze. Footsteps. Bare feet running across stone, but moving faster than any human should be able to move in complete darkness. They know these tunnels, Jake whispered. We need backup. We started heading back toward the entrance, but the footsteps kept pace with us. Always just out of range of our flashlights, but we could hear them. Clicking sounds too, like someone making signals with their tongue. When we climbed back up to the surface, Jake got on his radio and called for the state police. We've got a possible kidnapping situation, he told them. Unknown number of suspects living in cave system. Request immediate assistance. While we waited for backup, Jake and I walked the area around the cave. That's when we found the trail. Footprints in the soft mud near a spring. Small feet, like children, but the toes were too long and spread too wide. The prints led from the cave to a spot where the ground was disturbed, like something had been buried recently. We dug down about 2 feet and found them. 3 backpacks, the kind kids carry to school. Inside were lunch boxes with food that had gone bad, homework with names on it, and school ID cards. Jenny Martinez, age 9. Tommy Chen, age 8. Sarah Williams, age 10. These kids were reported missing from Waynesboro 2 weeks ago, Jake said, checking his notebook. Bus stop disappearances, no witnesses. That's when I understood what we were dealing with. The old stories were real. There really were people living in these caves, and they'd been taking children from the surface for God knows how long. The state police arrived with dogs and spelunking equipment. But as we prepared to go back into the caves, something happened that changed everything. A scream echoed up from the cave entrance, high and terrified, definitely a child's voice. Then another scream, and another. "They've got kids down there right now," Jake said. "Aid." We didn't wait for the full team. Jake, 2 deputies, and I grabbed ropes and lights and went down into that cave faster than was safe. The screaming was coming from deeper in the system, from passages we hadn't explored yet. But as we rappelled down, I heard something else mixed in with the children's screams. Adult voices, clicking and whistling like some kind of language. And underneath it all, a sound that made my blood freeze. Chewing, like animals feeding. We were too late for some of those kids. But maybe, just maybe, we could save the others. If we lived long enough. The deeper we went, the more the cave system opened up. Our lights showed passages branching off in every direction, some heading down at sharp angles. The walls were covered with more drawings, but these were different, newer. They showed pale figures with 2 big eyes and 2 long fingers, hunting normal people like animals. The screaming had stopped, but we could hear voices ahead. Children crying and those clicking, whistling sounds that might have been some kind of language. "Stay together," Jake whispered. "Don't let them separate us." We followed the main passage down, deeper into the mountain than I'd ever imagined it went. The air smelled like decay and something else. Something wrong. Then we saw the light ahead. Not electric light. Fire. Flickering orange light coming from a chamber so big our flashlight beams couldn't reach the ceiling. As we got closer, we could see figures moving around the fires. Small figures, pale as bone. Jake held up his hand, and we stopped. He peered around the corner, then motioned us forward. The chamber was huge, big as a church inside. Fires burned in stone rings around the space, and the smoke drifted up through cracks in the ceiling. But it was what the fires showed that made us all suck in our breath. There had to be 30 of them. Men, women, and children. But not like any humans I'd ever seen. They were pale as paper, so white they seemed to glow in the firelight. Their eyes were huge and black, taking up half their faces. Their fingers were long and bony, with nails grown out like claws, and their teeth, God, their teeth, filed down to sharp points like animals. They were gathered around something in the center of the chamber. As we watched, one of the pale children ran over to the group, carrying what looked like a human arm. An adult arm. "Jesus Christ," one of the deputies whispered. That's when we saw the cages. Along one wall of the chamber, crude cages made from old mine equipment and bones. In 3 of the cages, we could see children. Normal children, dirty and scared, but alive. "Jenny Martinez," Jake whispered, checking his notebook. "That's her, in the middle cage." The pale people, I couldn't think of them as human anymore, were preparing some kind of ritual. They'd arranged bones in patterns around their fires, and one of them, bigger than the others, was making sounds that might have been speech. The others repeated the sounds back. "We need to get those kids out," I said. "How?" Jake asked. "There's 30 of them, 4 of us, and they know every inch of this place." That's when the big one, their leader I guessed, turned and looked right at us. His eyes were like black holes in his white face. He opened his mouth and made a sound like no human throat should make, a shriek that echoed off the chamber walls and seemed to go right through my bones. All 30 of them turned toward us at once. "Run!" Jake said. We ran. Behind us came the sound of bare feet slapping against stone but moving too fast. They were following us through passages that were completely dark, but they didn't need light. They'd lived down here for generations. "This way," I yelled, trying to remember the path back to the surface. But in the dark, with adrenaline pumping, everything looked the same. One of the deputies, a young guy named Collins, fell behind. I heard him scream once, then a wet tearing so. Then nothing. "Keep moving," Jake shouted. We made it to a narrow passage that forced us to crawl. I went first, Jake behind me, Deputy Harris bringing up the rear. I could hear them behind us, clicking and whistling, but the passage was too narrow for them to move fast. Then Harris screamed. I looked back and saw pale hands grabbing his legs, pulling him backward into the darkness. His flashlight went spinning, and the light showed white faces with black eyes and pointed teeth closing in on him. "Keep going," Jake yelled. We crawled faster than I thought possible, scraping our knees and elbows raw on the stone. Behind us, Harris's screams cut off suddenly. We made it to the main chamber where we'd first entered the cave system. But when we looked up at the rope we'd used to climb down, it was gone. "They cut our rope," Jake said. We were trapped 40 feet underground with those things between us and any other way out. That's when I remembered something from my mining days. Emergency flares. I always carried them in my pack in case someone got lost in the woods at night. "Jake, get behind me," I said, pulling out 3 road flares. The clicking sounds were getting closer. I could see pale shapes moving just outside the range of our flashlights. I struck the first flare. The red light exploded through the chamber, bright as daylight. The pale things shrieked and covered their eyes, falling back into the darker passages. "The light," Jake said. "It hurts them." I struck the second flare and threw it into the passage they'd come from. More shrieking, and I could smell something burning, like meat. "We need to get to those kids," I said. "Walter, we'll never make it back down there. We have to try." That's when we heard it. Children's voices coming from above us. Normal children's voices, crying for help. "Mister, help us, please." I looked up. There was another opening in the chamber ceiling, one we hadn't noticed before, and light was coming through it. Sunlight. "There's another way out," Jake said. Using the rope from our packs, we climbed up, toward the voices. The pale things followed us as far as they dared, but the flare light kept them back. We found ourselves in a different cave system, one that led directly to the surface. And in a natural chamber just below the entrance, we found them. 2 children, alive but terrified. Jenny Martinez and Tommy Chen. The third child, Sarah Williams, was there too, but she was dead, and she'd been partially eaten. "Don't look," I told Jake as we untied the living children. "Just get them out of here." We carried Jenny and Tommy up into daylight. They were in shock, couldn't tell us much about what had happened. But Jenny whispered one thing that I'll never forget. The pale children said they were lonely. They wanted us to stay and be their friends forever. As we reached the surface, I looked back into the cave. The pale things were down there, waiting for dark, waiting for another chance to come up and take more children. That's when their leader appeared at the cave mouth. He was bigger than the others, maybe 5 feet tall, but built like he was made of wire and bone. His skin was so pale it was almost transparent, and I could see dark veins underneath. But it was his eyes that got me. They were completely black, no whites at all, and they looked at me like I was something to eat. He tried to follow us into the sunlight. The sun hit his skin like acid. He screamed, and his white skin started to blister and smoke. But he kept coming, reaching for Jenny with those long, clawed fingers. I struck my last flare and shoved it right into his face. He fell back into the cave, shrieking and clawing at his burned skin. But as he disappeared into the darkness, I heard him speak. Not in that clicking language, but in English. Words he must have learned from listening to his victims. "More children will come. They always come. We are so hungry." Then he was gone, back into the deep places under the mountain. But I knew he was telling the truth. They would be back. The federal people came within 6 hours. Not regular FBI, but men in black suits who wouldn't give their names. They sealed every cave entrance on Blackstone Ridge with concrete and steel. Put up new warning signs about dangerous geological conditions. The official report said Deputy Collins and Deputy Harris died in a mining accident. Cave-in, they said. Bodies never recovered. Jenny Martinez and Tommy Chen spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Physically, they were okay. Mentally, they'd never be the same. The doctors said they kept asking when the pale children were coming to get them. Jenny still draws pictures of white figures with black eyes. Sarah Williams' death was listed as a hiking accident. Her parents never learned the truth about what happened to her. Jake Morrison retired early and moved to Florida. Last time I talked to him, he said he still has nightmares about those black eyes. He installed security lights all around his house, keeps them on all night. As for me, I requested a transfer to Arizona, desert country, where everything is open and bright and you can see for miles. I can't handle enclosed spaces anymore. Even my apartment has to have windows in every room. But here's what keeps me awake at night. I've done some research since then. Missing children in Appalachian communities going back over a century. Always the same pattern. Kids vanish near caves or old mines. No trace ever found. And it's not just Virginia. Reports from Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. Anywhere there are deep caves and old mining operations. The stories are always the same. Pale figures seen at night. Children's voices singing in empty places. Kids who go missing and never come home. The Cherokee were right about the White Walkers. They knew what lived in the deep plow, aces under the mountains. They knew to stay away. But we didn't listen to the old stories. We thought we knew better. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Kentucky. 3 children, missing from a campground near Mammoth Cave. Searchers found drawings scratched into rocks nearby. Stick figures of pale people leading normal children underground. I told him to call the federal people, seal the caves, and stay the hell away from them. Because what I learned at Blackstone Ridge is this. Some things are older than we are. Some things were here before us, living in the dark spaces under the earth. The mining disasters didn't create them. They just gave them new places to hide. And they're still hungry, still waiting, still taking children when they can. So if you're ever hiking in mountain country and you see old mine shafts or cave openings, just keep walking. Don't go exploring. Don't let your kids play near them. And if you hear children singing where no children should be, get out of there fast. Because the hollow folk are real, and they're still down there in the dark places under the mountains, waiting for you to come close enough. My name is Walter Graymont, and that's the truth of what happened at Blackstone Ridge in October 1974. I pray to God you never have to learn it for yourself.